right, it's 11:32. Are board members back? All right, let's move on to agenda item 7, Water Education Colorado Annual Scope of Work Review.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Greg.
Great. Thanks, Director Hawkins. This is Greg Johnson, CWCB staff. This is agenda item 7, Water Education Colorado Annual Scope of Work Review. So like many other things these days, this item has recently changed due to our rapidly evolving circumstances. As a result of the major budgetary impacts and uncertainties that were noted earlier by Director Gibbs and Director Mitchell, the board's review of Water Education Colorado's scope of work is being postponed to the July 2020 board meeting. Therefore, this is no longer an action item and instead is being presented briefly for information purposes only. Just want to remind the board that the CWCB has supported Water Education Colorado since its inception in 2002. Every year, the board reviews the proposed scope of work for the upcoming fiscal year. Staff work with WECO to craft the scope to most effectively support important education and outreach goals of the Colorado Water Plan. The CWCB typically supports WECO with $150,000 in the form of an annual non-reimbursable grant from the construction fund. This then leverages other funding from a number of other different sources. We will continue to work with WECO as things evolve in the weeks and months ahead to determine the best course of action moving forward. More than anything today, I really wanted to thank WECO for the strong and productive partnership that we've had for almost 20 years now. As we speak, under the leadership of Jayla Poppleton, WECO continues their good work, nimbly transitioning their various programs to accommodate our current reality. Despite these difficult times, we will continue our strong working relationship to meet the important education goals of the Water Plan in the months and years ahead. Thank you.
So this, oh, I'm raising my hand.
Director Mitchell.
Thank you, Director Hawkins. I just wanted to echo a lot of what Greg said. These are historic times. WECO is an incredibly important organization, but we did feel like we needed to take some time to relook at this in these unprecedented times.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Director Yan.
I just wanted to, WECO is important, but I wanted to thank you for postponing this till we can figure out exactly what our status is on funding. I know there's a lot of things that are going to be vying for a little bit of money, and so I really appreciate you. And I don't know if WECO also suggested this or not, but I want to appreciate whose ever idea it was to postpone this until July, and maybe we'll have a better idea of what kind of funding we'll have in the future.
Director Yan, sorry, we have been working closely with WECO staff on this. So, and we will certainly continue to in the weeks and months ahead.
All right, thank you, Greg. If there are no further questions, I will move us to agenda item 8, final action on uncontested 2020 in-stream flow appropriation in divisions 4 and 6.
So good morning. For the record, Rob Veal, CWCB staff. I am presenting agenda item number 8, uncontested 2020 in-stream flow recommendation, in-stream flow appropriations in water divisions 4 and 6. And this is an action item. So some quick background information. On January 27th, the board formed its intent to appropriate ISF water rates on 6 stream segments. Pursuant to Rule 5D of the rules concerning the Colorado in-stream flow and natural lake level program, notice of the board's action was sent to the ISF subscription mailing list on February 3rd. This notice provided all parties with a deadline to file a notice to contest, which was due to the CWCB no later than March 31st. Staff did not receive notices to contest for 5 of those stream reaches, and as such, staff is seeking final action today. So Vivian, if you can move forward one slide. So I can bring your attention on the map on the screen, just to give you a geographical overlay of where these 5 segments are located. First, in Water Division 4 are Cement Creek and 2 segments of Spring Creek. And these are both increases, and they're both located just outside of Crested Butte. Clear on the other side of Water Division 4 is Kelso Creek, which is tributary to Escalante Creek. And then moving up to Water Division 6 is an unnamed tributary to Bunker Creek. So Vivian, if you can go to the next slide, please. So this next slide just shows the recommendations in tabular form with the Water Division, stream name, watershed, county, length, upper and lower termini, and the flow rate and timing. And this information is identical to what was previously provided to the board in the staff memo. Vivian, if you can move one more slide forward. So I can provide you with staff's recommendation, and it's quite the mouthful. So staff requests that the board make the following determinations and take the following actions on each of the appropriations identified in the tables attached to the staff memo. The information necessary to support these determinations is contained in the memo. The recommendation letters and documentation provided by the Bureau of Land Management, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and High Country Conservation Advocates, and in staff's oral and written presentation provided at the January 27th, 2020 board meeting. If you can move one more slide down, Vivian. So the recommendation continues. 1, determined pursuant to section 3792-102(3) that for each ISF appropriation in the tables attached to staff's memo, there is a natural environment that can be preserved to a reasonable degree with the recommended water rights if granted. The natural environment will be preserved to a reasonable degree by the water available for the recommended appropriations, and such natural environment can exist without material injury to water rights. And pursuant to ISF Rule 5F, established January 27th, 2020 as the appropriation date for these water rights. And then finally, request staff to work with the Attorney General's office to file an application for these water rights in Water Court by the end of this calendar year. So that's all I have for the presentation, and I can take any questions if there are any.
Director Anderson.
I don't have any questions or concerns, but I would move that we approve staff recommendations on agenda item 8.
Second.
All right. Director Anderson has moved to approve staff recommendations on agenda item 8, seconded by Director Schwartz. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. If anybody objects or needs to recuse themselves, please signify by raising your hand or letting me know in the chat. And seeing none, this motion is approved. And Director Mitchell had something to add in here.
Yeah, and I neglected to mention this in my director's report, but I figured this was a good place to interject after action was taken. But I mentioned House Bill 1157 in my director's report, but I neglected to mention that some of the steps that we're taking to move that forward. If you recall, House Bill 1157 requires the CWCB to promulgate rules to implement the bill's provisions. And CWCB staff and attorneys are planning the rulemaking process and developing draft rules. So staff intends to update the board on this process at the July CWCB board meeting. But in the meantime, we also intend to schedule 1 or more stakeholder meetings for sometime in August to get public input on the rules after discussing with them with the board. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. I'm sorry I neglected to say it in my director's report. Rob, sorry to steal your agenda item for a second.
That's totally fine.
Thank you, Director Mitchell. Look forward to More on that in July. Let's move on to agenda item 9, contested 2020 in-stream flow appropriation in Water Division 2.
So once again, for the record, Rob Veal, CWCB staff, this is agenda item number 9, contested 2020 in-stream flow, contested in-stream flow appropriation in Water Division 2. And this, once again, is also an action item. Some background information: on January 27th, the board formed its intent to appropriate ISF water rights on the 6 stream segments. As previously covered in agenda item number 8, 5 of those stream segments were uncontested. This agenda item covers the 1 ISF which was contested on Iowa Gulch. So Vivian, if you could just move to the next slide, please. So just to give you guys an idea of where Iowa Gulch is located, it's just over 3 miles outside of the town of Leadville in Water Division 2 in Lake County. Vivian, if you can move one more slide over. So pursuant to Rule 5D of the rules concerning the Colorado in-stream flow and natural lake program, the Parkville Water District filed a notice to contest this appropriation. No other entities or participant status were requested, and the deadline to do so has passed. Staff from the CWCB and representatives from the Parkville Water District are scheduled to meet a week from today, and we hope to see if there's any mutually acceptable terms and conditions that can be reached to settle this matter. If you can do us one more slide forward, please, Vivian. So here's staff recommendation. So with all this in mind, staff recommends that the board designate Deputy Attorney General Amy Beatty as the hearing officer for the contested in-stream flow appropriation on Iowa Gulch, and to set the hearing date to be held in conjunction with the board's September 16th through 17th, 2020 meeting. And that's what I have for the presentation.
Thank you, Rob. Linda, you would like to address us. Linda Bassi.
Good morning. This is Linda Bassi, CWCB staff. I no longer need to address you, even though I love talking to you all. Becky took care of the item I wanted to tell you about, so thank you.
Oh, thank you, Linda. Director Trick.
Thank you, Director Hawkins. I just have a quick question for Rob. Rob, can you maybe give us a little bit of an idea what the concerns were from the Parkville district?
Not to try to characterize their notice to contest too widely. I think there's been some difference of where the location of the actual lower terminus is going to be located, which is the Iowa Gulch intake. So we have our location derived from CDSS, the decision support system, and that has subsequently been moved in the decision support system. So I think part of the concern is that we have the correct lower terminus for this in-stream flow appropriation.
Any other questions for Rob?
I have a question.
Director Felt.
Just a process question, since I haven't been through this before, but we would just be basically moving to set a hearing date in September, and then we as a board would have an opportunity to kind of hear the details of both sides of the contested appropriation at that time and sort of weigh in later. Is that a correct assessment?
So that is a correct assessment. So this is all contained within the ISF rules, but today you would be designating a hearing officer. Then the hearing officer would subsequently start formulating some timelines for submission of documents and meetings between all the parties in this matter. Then the next time the board would take this back up would be in September, where they would have access to all that material that had been collected. And there would be a formal hearing at that time. And that's only if the parties can't come to some resolution before then as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right, we have staff recommendation. This is an action item. Director Brody.
I will move approval of staff recommendation regarding this contested in-stream flow to appoint or to designate Deputy Attorney General Amy Beatty as a hearing officer for a contested hearing to be set at our September meeting.
All right, Director Brody has moved staff recommendation on agenda item 9, seconded by Director Yan. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. If anybody needs to recuse or opposes the motion, please signify by raising your hand or letting me know on the chat. Seeing none, motion passes. Let's move on to agenda item 10, Financial Matters Construction Fund and Severance Tax Perpetual Based Fund.
Good morning, it's Kirk. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Kirk.
That's really cool when everybody gives a thumbs up. I like that. Okay, so Madam Chair, agenda item 10A is an information only item. And it's been quite a whirlwind since we last talked about the CWCB funds with the board. I want to point out that since that time, it's been a whirlwind of rapid fire questions that come in, how CWCB's funds look and how we do things. And it can get a little bit complicated because it doesn't necessarily line up with normal state flow of revenue and budgets. And I wanted to thank the staff that I get to work with. Lauren Miramont is the accountant in the finance section. And her response to the questions and trying to get it as quickly as possible. And you probably all have accountants, and you know when you ask them to do something in a hurry, they're very reluctant just because they want to make sure that every penny is accurate. And it's just become very stressful. And Tina Heltzel also with our staff, and certainly Anna Moss was a champion in the go-between process to get us to where we are today, and I'm sure we're not even close to the end of it. As mentioned, 45.5 million was voted on to be taken out of the severance tax, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Before I get started, I want you all as board members to know that when I talk to you about what the fund looks like, I take out money out of the equation when you approve it. And that becomes important when we're dealing with the projects bill that's going to come up in the legislation here soon, we hope. So my numbers, when you've approved a loan, as an example, the Ark Valley Conduit, you approved a loan for $100 million, or actually $90 million plus the $10 million grant. I take that out of the available money for some other applicant, whether it be for, well, primarily for loans. All of the grant stuff was prior approved through legislation. But I work in a cash world, so I make sure that that money is available when we promise it to an applicant. Also, I wanted to share just some of the assumptions that we work with at the time that I present these reports. And one of them is that we laugh about is the severance tax projections are accurate. You heard Director Gibbs talk about that they've taken a nosedive and then adjusted down. They seem to move even more frequently now than they did before, and they are trending downward. I will share that the current year severance tax, the year that we're in right now that'll end in a couple months, stayed fairly steady. And so it's really the next 2 years that the bottom dropped out about, I don't know, 3 months ago, and then it dropped a little bit more. And so it's those out years that are going to probably have as much impact on the loan program and other activities that CWCB is involved with than anything. The next assumption that we make in all of our forecasting and the way we do things is that our borrowers are going to pay on time. And we've had questions asked, you know, what are you going to do if borrowers have trouble paying back their loan. And I think we have policies in place that guide the board on how we handle that. We do have some tolerance, some window that we give them. We have had some questions about reserve accounts, how they access that. I don't know that I've seen necessarily a consistent message that I'm not going to share with you that I'm concerned about our borrowers, because we haven't heard that, but I think it's good for us to just have that in the back of our heads as we prepare for maybe the more unknowns going forward. So as I present the numbers that I deal with, the models all include the assumption everybody's paying back on time. And then the third assumption is one that we don't really talk about much, but in general, we anticipate making about $50 million in new loans every year. And that lines up with a couple things. One, it lines up with the market pretty well with what we've seen. Obviously, during tough times, the demand goes down. Maybe projects get delayed because of the uncertainty, but our general plan is to do about $50 million worth of new loans, and that tracks over the last 9 years. That's been our average. If we take out the two very large loans that this board approved, one of them to Northern District for Chimney Hollow, that was a $90 million loan, and then this latest Ark Valley Conduit loan was $90 million. If I take those out of the equation, the average is $50 million a year. So that gives you an idea of what kind of workload we want or what we expect to do as part of these reports that I'll share with you. I also wanted to point out last time that the severance tax and construction fund were a target for general fund sweeps. We had severance tax revenue flowing in bigger than ever. And so the timing of the budget trouble that happened in 09 and 10 was really shored up on the financing side, the loan program side, by very large severance tax revenue. And unfortunately, this time, the budget problem lines up with a very, very low projected severance tax. So the recovery is not expected to happen in the short term. So we're kind of just dealing with what we have right now. And I guess with that, I'm going to jump into the spreadsheets. And the first one, let me see if I get yeah, there we go. I get to click on the document too. So if I blow that up, did it get larger on your end as well? Okay, so this is the standard presentation that I provide. And so it may be necessary to focus a little bit tighter on some of the details now that we're going to maybe looking at some pennies a little bit closer going forward. But I think I want to just have you focus, and I'll use the actual spreadsheet line number 10. You see the little 7 next to it, but let me use the large number on the left side of the screen. So row 10, you can see that the projections for severance tax revenue coming in, I've got at 97 million, and we were at 91 million coming into this point. So we're closing in on the end of the fiscal year, which will be the end of June. And so everything seems to be lining up pretty well with what we would have assumed when we started the fiscal year back in July of 2019. Revenue is, again, flowing well. If I scroll down, you can see we've done almost $16 million in loans in this fiscal year. We don't recommend any loans out of this fund at this board meeting. And continuing on down, you can see how I program the fact that this board approved our non-reimbursables. And so line 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, those were budgeted in my spreadsheets because the board approved those. Many of those items are in the projects bill that is awaiting approval by the legislature. So again, I just make those assumptions. You see the line 29 shows 47 million is my projection at the end of this fiscal year. That allows us to do those loans in July and September and November. So we're lined up with available funds for new loans, but it also allows us to operate. We need about $13 million to operate, and then we've got a lot of other things that can affect that number, those non-reimbursables that we need into the future, some of the programs that we have. So the bare minimum right there is probably $13 million before I would panic. And so we have about $30 million available for new loans in July out of this fund. One of the things that is noticeably absent from my spreadsheets is Director Gibbs' comment about the $33 million Tabor emergency money. That has been funds that we are aware of. I'll be honest, it was always in such an emergency fashion. We didn't give it a lot of attention. I always felt that if the governor needed to access the $33 million out of the construction fund, and actually, by the way, there's two $33 millions. One is out of the construction fund and one is out of the severance tax fund. And the severance tax comes in line first, so it would be used first and then construction fund second. And I always felt like if that were the case, we have a lot of projects, as you all know, that we have approval, but we haven't even contracted for. And much of our money waits to go out the door until the construction project starts. And so I figured at the time that that $33 million would be needed, we would have made some adjustments and maybe had to slow down some expenditures as necessary. So I always felt like emergency was really that, an emergency. So I didn't ever program it into this. We may need to do that a little different in the near future, not knowing where we're headed with this emergency. So with that, I'm going to shift to the severance tax fund.
Kirk, I'm going to just ask before you shift if there are questions from board members. I did have a question on line item 24. Did I hear correctly that we're not anticipating water plan implementation funding in the 2020 projects bill, or do we not know yet?
It is in the draft form of the projects bill right now. So that money, that 12.25 is what this board approved last September in the Finance Committee meeting and then ultimately at the November meeting, and it has been drafted into the projects bill. So pending legislative approval, that will be set up for spending after July 1st. And much of that implementation funding will then come back to this board in the form of water plan grants and watershed restoration and ATM grants and things like that. So they get another look from this board even after the projects bill goes through.
Hey, Kirk, this is Lauren. Can I just jump in real quick on the projects bill question? Director Hawkins, I just wanted to note that things could still change with the projects bill, even before it's introduced. The bill sponsor, Dylan Roberts, has indicated that he wants to have the bill available for introduction on the first day that they reconvene on the 26th. But I think everyone is just waiting to see what happens with the JBC in the next couple of days. And there may still be changes that are made to the projects bill before it's even introduced in the legislature. We just don't know.
Thanks, Lauren. That is helpful. Kirk, thanks for stopping. I think you can move on to the next tab.
Okay, now we shift into the other fund, the severance tax perpetual base fund, and the same focus. These two numbers are expected projections for revenue coming in is 193 million. A large chunk of that is that 45 million deauthorization number right above it. That exists because the Ark Valley Conduit previous authorization expired, and that was what we re-upped with the most recent 90 million. So we credited back in as available and then deducted down below in that new loan authorization. So again, the difference between the 193 and the 186 is about where we would want to be for the next couple months to continue getting revenue in. And you can see the current projection for severance tax in the current fiscal year. We've received 27 million of the projected 33, so we're on track for the most part to receive our severance tax revenue into this fund during the current fiscal year. Scrolling down, you can see the current amount of loans that this board has approved, that 113 million. A large chunk of that is the Ark Valley Conduit $90 million loan. And then as you continue down, you're seeing influences from some legislative activities. The ABC 10 million right here is part of that $100 million funding package that will be in the projects bill, again with the caveat that maybe things could change. And then right above it, the 10 million, that's actually a transfer that occurred last July 1 as part of water plan implementation. And then the big red number is the general fund transfer that was approved by the JBC recently. And so that dropped our balance down. I use that in this form. Sometimes some of the other reports that are used show that in next fiscal year. I like to show the here and now to this board exactly what the most recent information is. So this is showing about $15 million left at the bottom of this list. Oh, I had another comment I wanted to make. The $45 million equals, I always like to use some relativeness of numbers. So the fund equity, so that would be if we were to take all our cash and call all the debt due out of severance tax, that 45 million is about 10% of the total. So that sweep of 45 impacts the fund equity to the tune of 10%. If you looked at both funds together, the construction fund and severance tax, it's about a 5% impact, because the two funds together are just about $1 billion at this time. So I wanted to address Director Schwartz's question about Chatfield. The Chatfield loans were made out of this severance tax fund, and we closed out 3 or 4 of the Chatfield loans back about a year ago, and they are in repayment, and those loans closed out a total of $70 million. So they are in repayment, so they fold back into the lines up above as part of the revenue that comes in. And then there's $30 million that has yet to be closed out as the project now is completing. We'll work with the borrowers and line up when their annual payments will be due. We're still dispersing money out of that, so it may be a little while. I don't know if it'll be in the next 12 months or not. But again, 70 million has already been closed out. Another 30 million is yet to be closed out to get them in repayment. And again, a level of magnitude, that total of $100 million produces $5 million each year in cash revenue into the funds here. So I guess with that, I'll stop. Madam Chair, if there's any questions specific on this one.
Board members, Director Dutton.
Thanks, Kirk. I just want to be super sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. So if I remember right, is the Arkansas Valley Conduit the only loan that we have approved in the last year that hit that threshold of needing to be in the projects bill?
Good question. The project bill actually has 3 loans in it. The other 2 loans, one of them was in a prior projects bill, and we increased the authorization by $6 million. And then the third loan was, I don't know if you remember, it was the tunnel project where they run into a lot of troubles, and it went from, I want to say, a $7 million loan to a $15 million loan. So it tripped that $10 million limit. And so that one also is in the projects bill. It was accounting wise, a majority of the money was taken care of in a previous authorization. And so that all is folded in here as well.
And so I understand that, everything's kind of up in the air and nothing's done till it's done. But the plan as it stands now is that even with this sweep of funds of the 45.5 coming out of this, we will still go forward with having those loan amounts in this project's bill as planned.
Correct. The current numbers indicate that if the project's bill goes through as this board approved it, we still have $50 million in new loans next fiscal year. I'll go to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But one thing to know, that $45 million, sometimes you hear me talk about the desire that we have to grow the fund to match construction inflation costs. We like it to stay in line with its buying power for future generations. In essence, what has happened with this $45 million sweep is it's taken away 2 years of that growth. So it set us back 2 years. And the way I've looked at this, I will continue to try to grow the fund with what this board authorizes us to do. I can't do anything about the legislative act during the sweep of funds. And so we'll probably be revisiting how much is available for non-reimbursable just based on the here and now at the time we get together in September. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And that decision affects how much is available for non-reimbursables such as water plan grants and some of the other grant opportunities we have. But again, that's a September discussion. So this, I show this to the board on occasion.
Director, hold on a second, Kirk. Sorry, Director Yan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Kirk about the revenue. Is it, I see it was projected for May. I was wondering, is there a lag there? Like when you give us May numbers, is that something that actually came in May, or is that something from February and then you project over to May what you expect? And then how solid are those numbers even now? Are you expected to carry those in? Because I see May projection on your spreadsheet.
So you're referring to, this is severance tax revenue, is this particular line item. I put the May projection in there. That is relative to the 33.3, and that's when the Ledge Council provides us their estimate for the next fiscal year and then the future years as well. Are you talking about loans in repayment?
No, I was talking about this year, what we've collected so far this year.
Okay, so the ones that collected is the 27, and that's, you know what, I have January distribution. I believe that number is actually April, so that should say April distro. And that will be receipts that we have to date. So we're only 6 million away from fully realizing the severance tax that has been captured this year.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep going, Madam Chair.
I do not see any other questions, so yes, please keep going.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is I use a model, and so I try to gather as much information as I have and the assumptions that I have to use them for different things when we get together in September to help us understand how much cash we have, how much we need to dedicate towards loans versus non-reimbursables. And you know, this just has all of my estimates. I've added this general fund transfer because it seems like we're in that era right now. But this has our operation on the construction fund side is over here on the left, and then severance tax is on the right. And then I just combine them over here in column 10 because I like to look at things more global through both funds because we have some flexibility to use loans out of one or the other. And the item that I want this board to think about is line 127 there. Up to this meeting, I have always indicated that we've had, if we do our normal business, which is about 50 million in loans and our operational activities, we anticipated having about 10 million for water plan implementation. And my gut feel is when we start talking about things in September at the Finance Committee meeting, it's going to be a little bit tougher to make that commitment for water plan implementation grant funding. I'm not saying that our recommendation would be less than 10, but that's where we start impacting things with a sweep of $45 million. But again, these are out years. I populate them with the latest severance tax revenue and the absence of severance tax, because it's looking like the Perpetual Base Fund is only going to receive $3 to $5 million in out years. Here's the 2 years out, it's projected to be about $10 million. Next year, it's projected to be $4 million. So we're just not generating any new opportunity money, which will then cause us to have to look at how much non-reimbursables we approve. So I'm going to leave this spreadsheet if there are no questions, and I want to show you a picture that I've used in the past that may help simplify some of this. Vivian, could you load that slide? So I put this slide together, maybe 10 years ago. I remember when I did it, I thought somebody might think I was creating something a little bit too cartoony for the importance of these large funds, but Alan Hamill, I'll never forget, he thought that was the greatest display of what we're trying to do. We're not seeing it yet. I assume Vivian's trying to, there it is. This just kind of gives you a big picture graphic of how the program works. And so I use the idea that this is a reservoir. Water folks understand storage of water and evaporation. And so I use this as my example of how the loan program does what it does. And so we've got our storm cloud up here that's producing, and now this is the problem now, that $40 million in the upper left corner, that's the average, about an 8 to 9 year average of severance tax coming in. Obviously that thing could change. No, it will change in the near future. But on average, we usually say 40 million comes in from severance tax, even though it goes up and down. 10 million comes in from federal mineral lease, producing about $50 million in rain that comes into our reservoir. We evaporate out of that reservoir, which is non-reimbursable, meaning we're not going to produce anything from that water. So I have $20 million for operations, and that's $13 million in operations, plus we have about 5 to 7 million in program funding that we've done over the years. So I just throw in an average number of $20 million there, and then the water plan grants at 10. So those are the non-reimbursables that are not going to produce interest earnings. So in our reservoir, we show that we have about $40 to $50 million available in new loans. Currently, we have about $190 million in loans we have not contracted for. So that cash sits there waiting for, and the two big ones are the northern 90 million and the Ark Valley conduit 90 million. So that sits there in the yellow zone. And then looks like we've got another 20 or 30 million in other loans that we're still in the process of getting under contract. And then the green zone is $200 million that we have under contract that is in some form of processing, money going out the door with those contracts. And those are our construction draws, or those of you that have borrowed money from us, the pay requests that come in. When the money's spent, that's when we disperse it. The yellow zone at the bottom of our reservoir, it's kind of a conservation pool type, and that is the investments that the CWCB has in Chatfield and Animas La Plata. And those are potentially saleable items, but they're just not in our normal operating zone. Chatfield might change in the near future as we sell some of our shares. But the water runs out the pipe on those construction draws. We build projects, and then our farmers, our great borrowers, repay interest through of their principal and interest, about 35 million. And so that's the big picture math of how the cash moves within CWCB's two funds. And if that didn't get too silly for you, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Are there any questions for Kirk? Director Anderson.
Absent is any conversation about sports betting. Obviously, you can't have any revenue when we aren't playing sports in this country, but is there any information out there about moving ahead with that program?
It is my understanding, based on some advertisement, that we have an opportunity to bet on table tennis, AKA ping pong, but other than that, I haven't heard much opportunity, but I think it is open for business. I haven't heard a lot of projections that are of any significance in the near future. I'm sure it's got a part of that sin tax, and it's not a lot of money available for gambling, but certainly that will have an impact on what we can do with water plan grants. That's a direct tie to the water plan grant program. So that would take some pressure off of this, the loan program.
Any income from that would be at least a year out, right? We would be dealing with 21, 22.
That's my assumption, yes, before it's of any significance.
Thank you.
Other questions for Kirk? Director Yan.
Yeah, Kirk, I just want to thank you for your graphic. It makes it clear to a guy like me, a dam operator. Just one thing is the crest width of your dam is lacking. And so I don't know if Director Ryan would have a problem with that or not. I just wanted to let you know.
But we have had some good years of severance tax. I think that's probably what you're seeing. We're up right there at the top.
So seeing no other questions from the board, Kirk, is it, I understand everything you said today. I don't have a sense yet for how cautious we need to be as a board approving grants and loans. Is that coming in July when we know a little bit more about the evolving financial situation at the state?
I'm sure that's the case, and I'll lean on Becky to be making those decisions. I know we're still trying to figure out not only grants, but even loans when they come in, you know, whether they are loans that can be delayed or do they have other opportunities, other lending sources. The tough part for us is we have money that's set aside to loan it. If we don't loan it, it's cash that sits available, and so it's kind of a constant balance of whether we keep conducting business as, at least on the loan side, as usual, or let it sit there. So, yeah.
A lot of this will be determined by the legislature, and so we are in a bit of a sit and wait. And so our financial team here at the state, between Kirk and Anna, Tina, myself, Lauren, we'll be looking at all of this and deciding our best path forward as we hear things, and we'll keep the board apprised on what's going on.
I think Celine stopped moving.
I stopped hearing everybody for a second, so she may have lost service for a minute. If Celine is not here, then we can go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. That is agenda item 11, our loans.
Hi there, this is Rachel Pittenger, CWCB staff, and I'll be presenting agenda item 11A. Shall I go ahead?
Please.
Okay. So this will be for the Chambers Reservoir Liner Rehabilitation Project for Arapahoe County Water and Wastewater Authority. Next slide, please. Thank you. The project is located in Division 1 in the South Platte Basin, and that you can see is defined by the red star. The loan amount requested is $2,525,000, at a loan term of 20 years at 1.90%. Ms. Emily Lowell, who is the engineering manager, and Mr. Steve Witter, who's the general manager for the authority, have been my main contacts for this part of the project, and I believe they join our meeting here today. Next slide, please. Arapahoe County Water and Wastewater Authority is also referred to as AQUA. They were incorporated in 1988. They have approximately 8 square mile service area, and that's defined by the blue outline off to the right in that image. They have about 4,767 water taps, and they serve approximately 10,000 residents, along with the commercial and industrial customers. Next slide. So a little bit of background would be helpful, I believe, for this project. The reservoir liner itself, construction began in 2010 of the reservoir, and the size is 1,400 acre feet. And the purpose is for raw water irrigation and replacement water supply. So in 2012, the reservoir filling began and excessive water leaking occurred, which caused all sorts of troubles. The reservoir was drained, and it was apparent that there was damage to the clay liner as well as a side slope failure. So there were some warranty claims filed, and eventually all settlement occurred with all the parties. So here we are. The AQUA still needs a solution to their reservoir. So you can see from the photos, the top photo is location of the reservoir with some commonly traveled roadways south of Denver. The bottom left photo kind of identifies in red where that side slope failure occurred. And then more of a real life photo is that middle photo where you can see it actually, it failed. There's that shelf there. And more up close is the photo next to it with kind of some designated labeling with the clay liner and sand and gravel. So pretty significant failure. Next slide. So with this proposed liner, again, the goals would be to stop the excessive leakage, maintain ability to fill the reservoir to capacity, and continue the raw water irrigation service that the folks are used to. They would like to do this by regrading and raising the reservoir bottom above the local groundwater table, and also installing a synthetic liner. And these photos that you see here are more current day. I believe that they were taken fairly recently in April. They have removed the old damaged clay liner. So it is ready to go. And as you can see, there is no water in that reservoir. The anticipated schedule to complete the rehabilitation is November of this year. Next slide. So in summary, total project cost is $2,500,000, and then with the service fee, $2,525,000 at 1.90% reduced interest rate for the 20 years. That gives an annual loan obligation of $168,228. And for the collateral, it will be a pledge of revenues. And I'd like to address any questions if anyone has any at this point. I'd also like to invite Emily and Steve to unmute themselves so they're ready to participate if they'd like.
I have done that. Thank you.
I have as well. Thanks, Rachel. Before we take questions, is there anything the applicant would like to add?
Yeah, this is Emily Lowell. Like Rachel said, I'm the engineering manager for AQUA, and want to say thanks to Rachel and to CWCB and the board for consideration of Aqua's Chambers Reservoir project. The Chambers Reservoir is an important project for Aqua to bring renewable water to our service area and supply non-pot irrigation water to our customers. So just want to say thanks again for your consideration of this project.
It looks like our chair is back. Are there questions for staff or for the applicant? Okay, I think we're ready for staff recommendation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Staff recommendation is as written.
You need a motion. Director Yan has moved to approve staff recommendation on item 11A. Do we have a second? Director Anderson has seconded. Any further discussion before we proceed to vote? All right, are there any objections or abstentions on item 11A? Okay, with that, staff recommendation is approved. Director Hawkins, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for my connection problem. Let's move on to item 11B, Lateral Ditch ML47 Incorporated. Cole, we can't hear you.
I'm going to run down to Cole's office real quick.
There's I think we've got a video going, but the audio isn't.
Oh, I'm going to run down.
All right, we will hold for that.
Can you hear his presentation?
This is agenda item 11.
Oh, I can hear you right now.
Loan request for the lateral ditch pipeline project by the lateral ditch ML47.
You were doing so well.
I can talk through it too, Vivian, if we need to do it that way. That's fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's see, can anyone hear me like this? Oh, you can.
We can hear you, yes.
Alrighty, that's all right, I'll just talk through it here. This is agenda item 11B. It's water project loan request for the lateral ditch pipeline project by the lateral ditch ML47 Inc. The company is located in Mesa County. The project.
And can you state your name for the record, please?
I'm sorry, yeah, of course. This is Cole Bedford, CWCB staff, finance group.
Thanks, Cole.
The project's located in Division 5. It's on the Colorado River just outside of Grand Junction. Again, the borrower is the lateral ditch ML47 Inc. Their requested loan amount is $707,000, the terms for which would be 30 years at 1.60%. In preparing the board memo for this loan request, my primary contact has been Kathy Erickson. She's the company's president. She's also on the meeting here after the presentation. I think she just wanted to have a few words. ML47 is a lateral ditch which draws from the headgate on the GVIC. The GVIC is the Grand Valley Irrigation Canal. And then the ML47 further distributes water to individual users. ML47 users pay an assessment to ML47 for maintenance, and they also pay assessments to GVIC for water. Currently, about 1,400 acre-feet of water is diverted annually into ML47 from the GVIC. In the 1970s, much of the ditch was lined and for many years was maintained by users under informal agreements. As the lining aged, maintenance needs became more extensive, and so Lateral Ditch ML47 Inc. was created in 2011 as an umbrella entity for the users to better coordinate improvements. The company identified a need to reduce water losses through the ditch and more accurately distribute the supply. They worked with NRCS, which designed the pipeline project, and will pipe the main lateral and distribution ditches. The cost of the project implementation is estimated by NRCS to be about $700,000. The design is completed and stamped, and work is expected to begin at the end of this year's irrigation season in October. This loan has two contract conditions recommended by staff, and I just want to talk through both of those. The first recommended contract condition is that the company apply Bureau of Reclamation Basin States program funds to the balance of the loan at the end of the project. ML47 received a $538,000 grant through the program for this project in 2017, and that grant will pay out as a lump sum at the end of the project. This kind of large down payment at the end of a project, similar to how we've worked with other borrowers in the past who have received federal grant money. Most notably, we set the same requirement for FEMA funding for some of the loans we did in 2013 after the flooding in the South Platte. The second recommended contract condition is that the company organize the GVI shares currently held individually by the lateral ditch users in such a way that they can effectively be used as collateral. So right now, the GVIC shares are held by all of the different users on the ML47 ditch. And we can't administratively manage all of those individual shares as they're currently held and try to place a lien on each different shareholder's shares. So we're working with ML47 on what exactly the mechanism will be for consolidating those shares. But at the end of the day, they'll need to have securities that we can reasonably hold as collateral, whose value equals or exceeds the long-term expected loan debt. So right now, the expected long-term loan debt is $169,000. That's the loan amount minus their federal grant amount. The company is pursuing other grant funding, including a WSRF, which will be before you in September. And if approved, that will lower that amount, but we're not making any assumptions about that grant at this point. So the financial process is in this graphic right here. Oh, I'm sorry, Vivian, go back one there. During the contracting period, we'll work with ML47 to reorganize the assets to be used as collateral, and we'll place a lien on the GVIC shares. During the construction period, the loan will disperse up to $700,000 for project costs, and any WSRF grant funds will be applied in conjunction with those dispersals as well. And then upon project completion, the Basin States program funding will be released, used to pay down the CWCB loan, and the remaining balance will go into long-term repayment. So finally, to summarize then, there's the breakdown of the project financials. The entire project cost is currently estimated at $700,000. The loan to Lateral Ditch ML47 Inc., including the service fee, will be $707,000 at a 1.6% blended interest rate for a 30-year term. Upon completion of the project, the company will make a down payment on the loan with received Basin States funds, reducing the long-term loan debt to $169,000 as it's estimated right now. Once the loan repayment period starts, the company's annual loan obligation will be $7,800. The financial ratios indicate that they are a strong to average borrower, and their assessments will be set to cover the repayment. The loan collateral is a pledge of those assessment revenues and GVIC shares, which will be collateralized prior to loan dispersals. And with that, staff recommendation is as stated on the front page of the board memo, including the two contract conditions. I can take any questions you have, and I believe Kathy is available as well.
Are there any questions for Cole on this agenda item? Seeing none, I would invite Kathy Erickson to make any comments to the board. I'm not hearing anything. Do we know if Kathy is still on the meeting with us?
I see that she's on the meeting there and her mic is unmuted, but I don't hear her either.
Kathy, I believe you're unmuted. This would be the time to speak to address the board. If you can hear us. Director Brody.
Unless there are any comments from the applicant, I would move that we approve staff recommendation on item 11B.
Director Brody has moved has moved approval of staff recommendation on item 11B, seconded by Director Schwartz. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. If there's any reason for opposition or abstention, please raise your hand or let me know on the chat. Seeing none, this agenda item is approved. We will move on to item 11C, Redlands Water and Power Company Pumpline Replacement Project.
Okay, again, for the record, I'm Cole Bedford. This is agenda item 11C, Water Project Loan Request for the Pumpline Replacement Project by the Redlands Water and Power Company. The company is also located in Mesa County. The project's in Division 5. It's near the junction of the Colorado and Gunnison rivers, just on the southern edge of Grand Junction. Again, the borrower is the Redlands Water and Power Company. Their requested loan amount is $641,350, the terms for which would be 20 years at 1.65%. In preparing the board memo for this loan request, my primary contacts have been Kyle Vanderberg, the company's manager and superintendent, and Nick Emmendorfer, the project engineer with JUB Engineers. Kyle is on the meeting here, and we'll see if we can get his audio after my presentation here as well. Like the previous project, the pump line is also located in the Grand Valley of Western Colorado. On the southern side of the valley, the Redlands Power Canal, the company's diversion, draws off the Gunnison River. The canal is primarily used to direct water into the company's hydroelectric power plant before directing it back into the Colorado River below the two rivers' confluence. About 60 CFS of water, though, is used for irrigation. The area serviced with irrigation water is south and west of the canal on the southwest side of the valley. It's mostly bluegrass and pasture grass and includes some small areas of orchards and vineyards as well. Oh, there, that. Yep, okay, so the green area there is the bluegrass, blue is pasture grass, and orchards and vineyards are in orange and red. In order to service this area, the water is pumped via the pump line, which is the subject of this project. The pump line is located just off of the canal. It's about 1,000 feet long and passes under Highway 340 before discharging into the first lift ditch. The upper portion of the line was replaced in 2007, leaving just the lower portion to be replaced. And that lower portion is the dashed line in this image here. If we can go to the next slide, there we go. Here are the project financials. The entire project cost is currently estimated at $860,000. The loan to Redlands Water and Power, including the service fee, will be $641,350 at a 1.65% reduced blended interest rate for a 20-year term. The financial ratios indicate that they are a strong to average borrower, and their assessments will be set to cover the repayment. The loan collateral is a pledge of those assessment revenues and the project itself. And with that, staff recommendation is as stated on the front page of the board memo, and I can answer any questions you all have and we'll see if we can get Kyle Vanderberg as well.
Are there any questions for Cole? Seeing none, I would invite Kyle Vandenberg to address the board. Just want to make sure we're giving adequate time for people to attempt to talk to us. You may be on mute. I'm not sure if I can see where you are, Kyle. Let's give him one more minute. And Director Schwartz, let's move to you while we're waiting.
I'm waiting for our applicant, and then I'll move the agenda item after.
Excellent. Let's give him another minute to see if we can make this work. All right, I'm getting a message from staff that we should go ahead and move. Director Schwartz.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and seeing no further questions, I would move approval per staff recommendation of agenda item 11C.
All right, Director Schwartz has moved approval of agenda item 11C, seconded by Director Dutton. Is there any further conversation? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. If there's any opposition or abstention, please indicate that by raising your hand or letting us know on the chat. And seeing none, this agenda or this motion is approved. We are now on to our lunch time at exactly 12:45. So you all can have your full hour for lunch. Good job.
Thank you.
And we will reconvene at 1:45 sharp.
Have a nice lunch. Can you hear me?
Dan.
We're gonna have pizza here, Jim.
Oh, dang. I would like some pizza. Can I expect that? Will it be delivered here by UPS or FedEx?
We'll
Conference will now be recorded.
And now we'll get you shipped over to that executive session. Good luck. All getting back in.
All right, I see that Viola turned the recording on, which means I think we're ready to reconvene and call the meeting back to order. Let's start with agenda item 12, WSRF grant applications.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. Are we going to vote on these in block or one at a time? This is Craig Abou, by the way, CWCB staff.
Craig, this is Becky. We have time to vote on them each individually.
Great, thank you. All right, this is agenda item 12A. It is an action item and a grant request recommended for approval by the Colorado Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is Trout Unlimited for the project titled Canyon Creek Fish Passage Project. The purpose of this application is to assist Trout Unlimited to obtain permits, design and install a new set of concrete baffles in an existing culvert that conveys Canyon Creek flows under Interstate 70 that ultimately discharge to the Colorado River. In addition, a wall in the upstream mouth of another adjacent existing culvert will be constructed to focus all flows into the culvert with the new baffles. These improvements will remove the current blockage of flows and facilitate recovery of spawning and juvenile habitat for cold water fish. The applicant requests $20,700 from the Colorado Basin account, and staff recommends approval.
I did my hand here.
Director Schwartz.
Would move, given there's no further discussion, I would move for approval per staff recommendation of agenda item 12A.
Director Schwartz has moved for approval of agenda item 12A, seconded by Director Yan. Is there any discussion? I do have a question about this one and another one. I noticed that we've got a couple of these where there is also going to be Colorado Water Plan implementation funding requests packaged in. And I'll ask this question on each of those applications. Can the applicant move forward with the project if we are unable to fully fund the water plant implementation funding request?
This is Craig Gabu again. What we'll do in this situation is if the water plan funding does not materialize, I will ask the applicants to provide a alternate source of funding to replace those funds and get confirmation of that prior to placing them under contract.
And if so, are there any conditions in the staff that need to be added to the staff recommendation, or is that a normal course of contracting for us?
That is normal procedure, Director Hawkins.
Excellent. Any more discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. If you have any opposition or need to recuse yourself, signify by raising your hand or letting me know in the chat. And seeing none, the motion is approved. Let's move to agenda item 12B.
This is agenda item 12B. It is an action item and a grant request recommended for approval by the Colorado Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is a Grand River Ditch Company for the project titled Davis Point Pipeline Project. The purpose of this application is to assist the Grand River Ditch Company install approximately 835 feet of 48-inch diameter pipe in an existing deteriorating open ditch, which has experienced significant leakage caused by the formation of large holes. The objective of this project is to reduce ditch seepage and improve water delivery to the existing users. Engineering of the pipeline and related structures, such as the concrete box inlet, a concrete box outlet, and a concrete structure for water control, will be performed by NRCS. The applicant requests $25,000 from the Colorado Basin account, and staff recommends approval.
Are there any questions for Craig? Director Schwartz.
And if there are no questions, I would move approval of agenda item 12B.
Director Schwartz has moved approval of agenda item 12B, seconded by Director Dutton. Is there any discussion? And seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. If you have any opposition or need to recuse yourself, signify by waiting or letting me know in the chat. And seeing none, the motion is approved. Let's move to agenda item 12C.
This is agenda item 12C. It's an action item and is a grant request recommended for approval by the Southwest Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is the town of Sawpit Water Activity Enterprise for the project titled Water Supply Plan and Water System Analysis. The purpose of this application is to assist the town of Sawpit update their water supply plan and to perform a water system analysis for upgrades to its public water supply system and plan for future growth. The proposed work includes the following tasks: water supply inventory, water demand and assessment, water system analysis, analysis of future potable water taps, water service cost analysis and rate structure development, development of water conservation measures, investigate the possibility of a new well and pump house, recommendations for adoption of a water code. The applicant requests $25,000 from the Southwest Basin account, and staff recommends approval.
Are there any questions for Craig? Director Yan.
I don't have any question, but since this is in your basin, and I know you'd probably like to move it, I will move staff recommendation on agenda item 12C.
All right, Director Yan has approved or has made a motion to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 12C, seconded by Director Brody. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. If anyone is opposed or needs to recuse themselves, signify by putting your hand up or letting me know on the chat. And seeing none, this motion is approved. I believe we have a member of the public, Richard Gittenbeek, and he had wanted to address the board for agenda item 12A. Richard, are you on the meeting now, and would you like to address the board? Don't hear anything, so you can let Viola know if you are here and wish to speak. And we can move to agenda item 12D.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is agenda item 12D. It is an action item and a grant request recommended for approval by the South Platte Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is the Colorado Agricultural Water Alliance for the project titled Outreach and Capacity Building for Ag Water Projects. The purpose of this application is to assist Colorado Ag Water Alliance conduct outreach to farmers and ranchers throughout the state. The WSRF funding will be used to cover part of the cost for outreach in the South Platte and the Republican River basins. This outreach includes three components: regional workshops and involve 50 to 100 attendees with an agenda of speakers. The subject matter covers water quality issues, ditch inventories, and how to find and secure grants for irrigation projects. Presentation to ditch companies on Regulation 85 and water quality issues impacting agriculture in the basin, and presenting at 4 meetings for agricultural organizations. The Colorado Ag Water Alliance is working to provide producers the knowledge and skills to take an active role in water stewardship in their communities. The workshops and outreach revolve around getting agricultural producers to participate in community discourse and decision processes about water at the state, regional, and local levels. Ultimately, the goal is to increase the amount of producers who are demonstrating sustainable water behaviors. The applicant requests $17,750 from the South Platte Basin account, and staff recommends approval.
Are there any questions for Craig? Director Yan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there are no, I just want to say CAWA does a good job doing this, and Greg Peterson has really moved into doing a lot of education outreach. So I appreciate their work there, and they they did secure a water plan grant at our last meeting, I believe. So with that, I would move staff recommendation on agenda item 12.
Director Yan has moved staff recommendation on agenda item 12D, seconded by Director Dutton. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. If you are opposed or need to recuse yourself, raise your hand or let me know in the chat. And seeing none, the motion is approved.
Thank you,
Let's
Madam
move
Chair.
on to.
That
Thank you,
concludes-
Craig. Great, let's move on to agenda item 13, Basin Implementation Plan and Water Plan updates.
Hello, Russ Sands, CWCB for the record. I'm here today to talk about where we're at with the Basin Implementation Plan and Water Plan updates. And I think our last presentation was back in January, so can I give you a status check on how much progress we've made to date? And I think I have control of the mouse, maybe? There it is. This is a slide you've seen before, but just a reminder on the timeline. We wrapped up at the end of last year, as you well know, the technical update, and have quickly kind of transitioned into moving into the Basin Implementation Plan updates. That is on track to wrap up in the end of 2021 and then ultimately roll up into the Water Plan update itself in 2022. And I will be going into a little bit of detail on each of these of kind of where we're at in the process. Before I do that, I wanted to step back, and Director Trick had asked me a question I thought would be helpful to maybe share with the board as well. But we have been really embracing trying to help the roundtables with doing some of this remote work, and understand as we're all experiencing today, it can be a challenge to have remote meetings. Just to kind of quick by the numbers, we did purchase this same format GoToMeeting accounts for all 9 roundtables. A lot of them are using that or using some form of webinar option. So about 8 are exploring some form of phone and or webinar options. 7 are using webinars. They almost all allow a call-in option as well. And 6 are using our GoToMeeting accounts. And of those, about 5 have taken us up on some one-on-one training to really just do a bit of a dry run. In a couple of cases, I think we've done that a couple of times, and we're certainly happy to extend that offer to any of the other basins as they think about how they might want to use these. With regards to progress since January, again, another way that we're really trying to help out and work with the local experts and the roundtables is through our prime contractor on this effort, Brown and Caldwell. We've created a SharePoint site that allows for some just easy facilitation of sharing materials back and forth. And some of the training I'm going to talk about, even the slides from that training, have been hosted there, along with any documents that we send to the roundtables, and it just really puts the power in the local experts and ultimately the roundtable's hands of just a quick access for documents. Speaking of those local experts, back in January, I think we were just a few days away from actually getting our prime Brown Caldwell under contract, and had just completed that, and then really transitioned into hiring those local experts. And of course, the roundtables had a huge role in that, and I think it was a big lift in a shorter time frame to first put out an RFQ and then go through a selection process, and then those selections were sent on to Brown and Caldwell. And I think in every case we just took their top recommendation of who they wanted to work with, and were able to get them under contract. That wrapped up in the end of April, and we moved forward with the local expert workshop that Director Mitchell had noted early on. Our original plan for that was to be a 3-day kind of deep dive into methodology, really understanding that in some ways the technical update has its roots even as far back as 2015, and we were kind of compressing 5 years of information into a few days. Given the impacts from COVID, we decided we still needed to take that time, but it would probably be better to kind of piece that out over a few days. So we ended up with a 5.5, 6-day workshop regime that went pretty well, and actually a lot of the local experts were really engaged, and I think it was very helpful to kind of set the stage of information that they would kind of roll back down to the roundtables and kind of help start some of those conversations. And now we're kind of in that process of following up with each of the basins. So I've kind of seen that as maybe a one-on-one with the chair, or done some subcommittee meetings, and we've already gone through a few of those to date, and looking forward to kind of hitting up all the roundtables as the next step. And then, of course, the local experts and some have already kind of had that first kickoff meeting with their roundtable about these efforts as well. So just to touch on the local expert workshops, and I say this just because as a point of transparency, we did get a lot of questions from various members of the public, some members of roundtables that ask if they could be involved. And to kind of keep the technology challenges limited, and also to make sure that the local experts had a safe space just to ask any questions they had, we really did try to just limit that to the contract team. But to be fair, what we put out to the local experts was really just this deeper dive of materials we already have online. We do have these technical webinars posted, they're hour-long, and of course we kind of expanded upon that a bit just to get into the weeds a bit more. But those are still available on the Water Plan website for anybody who's curious about any of the deep dive details. Are there. We did walk through in maybe a little more depth some of the tools, specifically the costing tool and the flow tool, and kind of did a little bit of a workshop. We've heard some interest in maybe that being a desire, especially on the flow tool, and are certainly open to exploring those options. Of course, this process also opens up the opportunity to updating those tools, and how we time that and where we roll those things out are something I think we are planning in the months to come. We spent a lot of time just explaining the opportunity. What was, what was the scope of potential that we saw, the areas that we had already heard feedback from roundtables they might want to dig into. And then we talked a lot about some cautions too. We kind of came up with a red light, green light, yellow light kind of format where, green light was all systems go, yellow was caution, and red light might be extreme caution. And we called those sideboards. And we talked a bit about this at the kickoff meeting with the chairs that we had. And it's certainly no stranger of a topic to the board, but I will cover one of those sideboards here. And I know that Director Mitchell and as well as Amy Ostick talked about this a little bit earlier. But one of those sideboards is just this concept of demand management. Many of the roundtables are eager to talk about it, and we just need to be careful to define what talk about is and what it means. It's important to note that when we asked for this funding, both from the board and from the legislature, that addressing demand management was not explicitly called out in that. If anything, I think quite the opposite, where the legislature specifically, as well as the board, had a lot of thoughts on demand management, how it should be handled, and had some caveats on spending for that. We need to honor that. And of course, now we have that funding process that's a separately funded board-driven effort, and we need to let that run to ground. And it's a concurrent effort that tracks with ours, and there may be things that inform it. There may also be opportunities where we could qualitatively reference demand management in a basin. We just need to be careful, and we try to take some links to explain that there are eyes on this, there are other eyes, and we just don't want to put out information that could effectively be used against us. And as Director Mitchell noted, we had someone from the AGO and Amy Ostick on our team, and Greg Johnson, for that matter, kind of attend one of those workshop sessions to help talk through that a bit. But the bottom line is that this isn't about filling a storage bucket in Powell. This bucket of funding is really about addressing the gap, the 500,000 acre foot plus gap, up to 754,000 acre foot gap that we have in Colorado, outside of anything that would happen around demand management or curtailment. I'll step back. Another thing that we hit on at the workshops was just how we got here, and it's a good reminder that every step of the way we have really worked hard to engage with stakeholders and with the roundtable specifically. A good example are these ones I'm calling out here, but in 2017, we had the technical advisory groups that were really helping to set the stage. I knew this would happen. My children's phone is going off in the background. Sorry, I hope you're not hearing that. We had the technical advisory groups that helped set the stage on what the methodology would look like, and we were really trying to scope that out with them. Then in 2018, we really actively made a roundtable roadshow effort where we went around the state and really talked about where we're at, what we saw as opportunities that were coming, and really tried to eke out from the roundtables what were they interested in, and in both what we were doing and what did they see as the opportunity ahead. And then of course in 2019 and really at the end of 2018, we kicked off the implementation working group effort, which was really members of each roundtable, some from IBCC, that would help us kind of flesh out what specifically a BIP update might look like. And that is really all codified in Chapter 5 of the technical update, which contains that laundry list of things that they felt were the most important things to explore. And I will note, demand management wasn't one at the time that was noted there. We did have a lot of interest on a few things I'll highlight, but more importantly, we got 100% consensus in the final call of that effort to move forward. So what came out of that? A few clear things. I mean, most notably, just the process we have. So this general contractor to local expert kind of prime sub relationship where the subs would be kind of housed in and working directly with the roundtables was something that came out of that effort and really high value for the roundtables who recognized that the first BIP was a big lift. It's a big effort and that some help would be appreciated. That we didn't want to take that funding from the WSRF accounts, the Basin accounts. And that was a big point of focus and the reason that we went to ask for funding first from the board and the legislature. And I'm extremely happy we did that to preserve the Basin account funds to work on projects, which we heard loud and clear. There was some interest in doing targeted studies, certainly some things we'll even touch on here in a minute, but ideas like forest health or the economics of shortages or even the future water conservation or things that came up. And at the time, those were scoped out with the thought that they would be online or on par with the technical memorandums in volume 2 of the technical update, which were a handful of case studies that would really dive into a topic. But wasn't ever envisioned to be a big budget. However, we did think there might be possibility to pool budget across basins should roundtables have a common interest in exploring something like forest health. But most importantly, I would say we had 3 clear mandates. And if you look at Chapter 5, there's certainly a lot of things, but if I boil them down into kind of the core elements, they're these 3. A mandate to really streamline and update the process. We heard so much about, it's great that Chapter 11 of the water plan says you're going to update this thing, but we shouldn't do anything just to do it, right? We want to make this add value. And by the way, could we find a way to just be smarter about it, make it cheaper? Does it always have to be this big of a lift? Are there ways that we could set ourselves up for success and kind of reduce the labor intensity of this thing moving forward? We heard a lot of projects. We want to focus on implementation, but recognition, especially as we kind of dug into this, that we need to improve project data, specifically cost and yield, where in cases with yield and even location of where these things live, we couldn't model projects in the technical update because we didn't have the data to do that. And then last but not least, but to dive into the methodology and the technical update and a recognition, again, that many roundtables felt that previous statewide water supply initiatives had been a bit of a black box, and they really wanted some insight into how the methodology was laid out and maybe a chance to improve that where they could. There we go. So where we're at now is kind of what I've framed up as that first lift, everything in Chapter 5, all the stakeholder engagement before really amounted to the original input from the roundtables that framed up the scope of work and the budget that we went for, recognizing that that was in many ways a streamlined budget and meant to be a cheaper effort than the first BIP update. And now we are combining that with the new input that we're hearing from roundtables, especially as they've had a chance to dig back into their BIPs and maybe think about what success looks like for them, what are their goals, and kind of a reflection on what they would like to tackle. And we will have to kind of merge those things. That's the task ahead that we're just framing up as a work plan. We'll have to merge both that kind of original input and budget along with the new input, and kind of the nexus of those things will be the formulation of a work plan. Key to that work plan are these core duties. Those core duties are those same things that I mentioned kind of in Chapter 5 of the technical update, but I'll highlight them again here, that we really need to scope what the BIP update looks like, what those work plans are. Effectively, they are a scope of work moving forward, and we've asked for a draft of that by July. We need to improve project data, or just maybe data in general. If we can get better data to inform and plug into the models, we certainly are open to doing that, but we also know a huge recognition to get better project data. Where we can get that better data and plug it in, we can refine technical update findings, and I think there's a few clear examples of where that's probably really beneficial, just in terms of getting better data already in some of the basins. We want to facilitate roundtable collaboration. Clearly, this is a roundtable driven effort, and I've said many times, this is not, honestly, it's not top down or bottom up. We succeed together and work together best when we meet in the middle, and this is 100% the spirit of this effort. And then we've talked a lot, and I will go into a little bit of detail of this kind of volume 1, volume 2 concept, really building off of the technical update itself, where we had a shorter, a more accessible volume 1, and then a volume 2 that had hundreds of pages more of technical memorandum that you could dive into if you really wanted to get into the weeds on some of the methodologies. And then last but not least, identify new analyses and studies. Some of those are going to be ones that we can fund through these efforts. Some of these are going to be perhaps outside of the existing budget and scope, but should be things that are captured to tee up for future funding. So as the basins are and the local experts are now going back to the basins, I mean, it really does, what's the scope of work is really a description of the project data that they have is something that we're asking for by July, helping to flesh out this work plan by telling us just the first pass of, do you have projects on your list that are, they're no longer something that's going to be pursued or something that maybe was an idea before, but shouldn't have made the list? Are there projects that are definitely moving forward and you have better data for that could be easily updated? Are there ones that are, you'd like to move forward, but just really have a lot of data gaps? It's kind of the first pass of what we're looking for. And we've asked the roundtables to kind of help us think through in July, knowing that this is really the first step in what we see as a year-long effort to kind of dig in and get better data across projects, and certainly when it comes to adding new projects to the list. I will also say there a core goal being that we hope to have an online database that will continue to allow for a dynamic and more consistent updating of any project information, so that even after the new BIP updates inked, Basin could go in and add in new project information or a new project pretty much on the fly as they prefer. Again, addressing these core duties that we just listed out is a key piece of just, how will those be done, making sure they're budgeted, a description of any additional studies that are going to be conducted, and setting a schedule and budget for all of these things, including the roundtable meetings themselves, and then a game plan for this volume 2. So let's talk about volume 2 for a second. If volume 1 is this easily accessible, in many ways streamlined entry point BIP strategy, it's really meant to be action focused, to capture the challenges of the basin and the goals, to have measurable outcomes, to really capture the current and projected water needs. Whereas volume 2, we've kind of teed this up as an evergreen document. It's the things that are less prone to being changed, the history of the basin, the background, any studies that are being referenced that the basin might have undertaken. And so with that in mind, there's a few ways that you could kind of handle this. And we've gotten, I think, a lot of really good questions of just flexibility in the basin and what are those opportunities. If you have to go through your original BIP line by line, and we had some interns that did that, we have a good sense of how much effort that is. It's going to be a lot of work, but there's a few options here that maybe range from a least intensive to a most intensive. So from left to right here, option A would be that you take your original BIP, what would be a piece of volume 2, and you say, I'm not going to edit it. And in some cases, it could be because the basin lacks actually the native files from the original document. It could also be that they just are making a conscious choice not to edit it and kind of owning that either through an intro document or just pointing to other documents that they may not need to go back and do this, labor-intensive touch on the original BIP. And they could add these support documents through additional technical memorandum that they may be working on that provide additional context. And then focus on channeling all the best parts of all those things up and rolling them into volume 1. Another option would be they could just go through their original BIP and do a light touch. Maybe they're not going to pull out graphs. We talked about, would any graph or reference to the technical update or statewide water supply initiative effectively be pulled out of that and just put into volume 1, since that's the stuff that's probably going to change a lot in the future? They don't have to. I mean, they could go through it and just decide they're going to keep that in there. Maybe they footnote it, say see volume 1, but they could do some kind of mix where they're just doing a light update all the way through to a third option where they can just go through the whole thing and comb through it and really want to retain an updated, a truly updated original BIP document along with the strategy document. And I will say that we've gotten a little bit of feedback in this volume 1. Is this the state, telling us like they're going to just write this volume 1 for us, and it's all got to look the same? That's not the intent. The intent is to honor the feedback that we got from basins of, hey, I want to see what other basins are doing in their BIP, but when I go and look at it, they look so different, I can't even see which section to reference. And so we just want to have a common template that walks through these things, that it pulls in the basin information as they're updating it. And that's really the goal for this volume 1. So as we're moving forward, we're really trying to be responsive to basin feedback, providing these documents that add clarity, addressing questions. We've gotten, I know one basin said, you have on here as a task that I should look and update my goals. Well, we don't want to update our goals. The intent behind that was that we recognize there's been 50% turnover on the roundtables, and that it could be that some basins that change in makeup has led to additional goals that may need to be added, or potentially a review of their existing goals. But if the basin looks at their goals and they're fine with how it's laid out, absolutely check the box and move on and free up that money to do something else. So we're trying to explore those options that add flexibility. We're trying to take in feedback, and certainly some of that has been around a lot of interest in these cross-basin concepts. Again, revisiting these ideas around forest health or economics of shortages. There's been a lot of really great discussion. We had some of that at the local expert workshops, and a few of those sessions we actually had some identified time where the chairs and maybe one other person from the roundtable could call in and kind of help do a bit of a brainstorm on some of these things and get an idea of where we were potentially going. And that has really led to some unique outcomes, I think, that are pretty exciting. One of those is a recognition that some of this cross-basin discussion happens within the BIPs themselves, and some of it's really about the larger discussion of how it rolls up into the water plan. And so I'm excited to announce today that, and this is now live, and I actually can post the link in your chat, but this is something that we will be broadcasting and sending out. But we're going to have 4 water plan listening sessions. And the idea, this really came from some great stakeholder input, but from some of the folks that have been mentioned here. We had some great conversations on the ag side with Greg Peterson and Abby Burke on the environmental and rec side, and several others, and a lot of great input from the basins and the chairs as well. And just knowing that we really need to have a bigger public dialogue around where we're headed, helping explain the timeline. And so each of these workshops will be held from 10 to 11:30 on these dates. They're all topic specific, obviously, the first being on June 3rd for municipal, June 4th, so municipal and industrial, June 4th for forest health and watershed health, June 10th on agriculture, and June 11th on environment and rec, again, from 10 to 11:30 those days. And the flavor of those meetings will have about a 10 to 20 minute presentation from staff and our prime contractor, just talking about the process and where those opportunities are to provide input. And then we have some panelists, and we've got a really great lineup I'm excited about on each of these panels of just some really engaged community members that are going to talk through what their hopes are for the water plan update and the ideas that they would like to kind of bring to the surface. And we're going to let them talk about that, and then we're going to open it up for a larger discussion with the folks that call in. So if you go to Eventbrite, you can just look up Colorado Water Plan listening sessions and find these, and I will also get that link out. And with that, I will take any questions.
Are there any questions for Russ? Seeing Director Brown.
Russ, how do you, what's the feedback you're receiving from different basins on using the virtual platform? Do you think that it will slow down the time frame at all, or are people receptive? Is it generally working in rural areas?
A great question, and certainly there are some challenges, and I think generally folks are excited to move forward, and I think I don't know that it exactly slows up the process because they have their local experts that are continuing to do even kind of more one-on-one phone calls, but our goal is to absolutely be flexible. Again, the goals for July are all really framed up in the concept of having a draft work plan. If that isn't, completely inked or finalized or has pieces that kind of fold into it later, that's fine. I think the time frame, we've heard some feedback that it may be aggressive, and yet in comparison to the original BIP, it's far less aggressive. But the challenge is the one that you've noted of just getting people together especially in these times, is hard. It may be easier to get people on a webinar, but it's still hard to get folks to dive in and dig down into some of these more critical issues. So I think we're on a good track, and we've heard that. And Director Brown, I have a meeting even tomorrow with Alden in your basin too to talk about some of these things. But we also had earlier this week a call with the local expert in the AMPA and the Prime, and things seem very much on track. So I'm very encouraged by that, but where we need to, our goal is to be flexible and work with basins, absolutely.
Director Brown, did you want to go again?
Just real quick. Russ, I was speaking to a couple people that have maybe been more familiar with the Zoom platforms because they have teams across the country last week, and one person in particular had mentioned that they had developed, strategies to make some of these virtual platforms feel more inviting and have better dialogue. So if you're interested in getting a couple names on that, I'd be happy to connect you to. I'm sure you know them anyway, but just as a suggestion, one meeting that was done in our basin by this particular person was just excellent. They did a really good job, and I think people really got a lot out of the 2.5 hours that they spent on Zoom. There's strategies that I never knew existed out there, and thought I'd offer them up. That's all.
Absolutely, happy to take that input and get those names from you. We're always looking to improve and do things better, so I appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments for Russ? Seeing none, thanks, Russ. This is a lot of work, and it's an important piece of work that can really continue in these challenging times. So thanks for all of your work and the staff's work on it.
Thank you, and thanks to all the roundtables too.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to agenda item 14, CWCB Director Reports. Let's start with item A, Colorado River.
Well, thank you for a chance to catch up a little bit on the Colorado River. Had a good update, I think, from Becky's report earlier about the Colorado River, and obviously those issues I won't touch on necessarily, but we did have our roundtable meeting this week virtually, and we had a presentation on hydrology with Victor Lee, and I think that his bottom line of his presentation was that it's going to be a hot summer, and our runoff is as an average runoff, average snowpack, and the reservoirs are in good shape, and so I think that was again a launching point. Exactly, Root Eye up the street here is 90% over 90% full, so we're looking at that, and Green Mountain reservoirs all being filled. And then there are a couple presentations. One was by the Water Education Group and looking for support from the roundtable. And the other was very interesting presentation by the Water Reuse Colorado. And they had a lot of good information that was put forward from several individuals talking about how this could be an important tool moving forward, and the work they're doing on Regulation 84 through the CDPHE. And then, of course, Kevin Ryan, our director and state engineer, gave a great report, which was really helpful, I think. And he had everyone's full attention and talking about the compact compliance and certainly the administration of the rules moving forward, and in particular measurement of water in this region, which is important, and rulemaking. So I think that no one had really virtually any feedback, but I think that it was a really well presented, thoughtful presentation, Kevin, if you're still on with us. And then there was, no, I think it was really thorough. And even though I will say that the virtual format for the roundtable was extremely awkward. And I don't know if people weren't anxious about talking. There wasn't a lot of chatting in the chat box, but just a real reluctance for people to weigh in. And we had a SDM, and Brendan had a presentation on the VIP update, and it's just difficult getting feedback. And I have to agree that maybe there are platforms that could be more engaging, and breakout rooms where people have smaller groups that they can interact with. I think that if we're going to have legitimate input, I don't know if Russ George has seen it with the IBCC, but I'm spending all day on Zooms and with my work, so I know that we can do it. I know we can do it productively. And everybody has probably a different perspective on this, but there was a concern about the time, and I think the time feels challenging given the platform that we are working with. So good questions that came out of that, and just I thought it was a good meeting, and just overall other opportunities up in the Colorado Basin were some of the this summit in Summit County, the State of the River conference that went on, and Andy Mueller's presentations about, again, the issues and the challenges on the Colorado River overall. But I think the big focus is warming temperatures and what that's going to mean in the short term and the long term, and reaching 2 degrees, and what that really means overall for supplies, and as we face that with growth. And there was an article that Andy referenced in the Washington Post about how the Colorado River seems to be more impacted given, I think, temperatures and drought. But unfortunately, the warm temperatures didn't come in time to prevent the freeze in Palisade on April 14th. Darn, so we're going to lose our peaches over here. But more importantly, it's a $40 million industry, and so we'll lose 75% of that, of our Colorado produce, fresh produce. So if that's the bad news, super bad news that came out of our basin. And then also some good news is that the Sweetwater Lake getting the LWCF fundings, and so that's moving ahead, and it's going to be a terrific resource again in Western Colorado being put into public hands. So that's all I have to say, except for I think that we'll look forward to maybe hosting, but probably not, folks in the Colorado Basin, but we'll have more to talk about as we meet in July. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Schwartz. Are there any questions? All right, seeing none, we'll move into my report, agenda item 14B, San Juan and San Miguel and Dolores River basins. I think that we heard in Director Mitchell's report, and again from Director Schwartz, that we're grappling with drought again in our part of the state. And I would recommend, if you guys haven't seen some of the blog postings, like the one that John Fleck did on sneaky drought, it's sort of some helpful context for me to think about what we're seeing here. The sort of precipitous drop we saw in the hydrology in the San Juan River Basin is almost shocking, especially because it was happening as the pandemic unfolded down here. And so one thing that's sort of weighing on me on top of the pandemic is the wildfire risk in southwestern Colorado this year. And just what it will mean for our communities if we're trying to manage wildfire and wildfire response in the middle of a pandemic. So I think that's what a lot of us down here are hoping that we won't see, but maybe preparing for this year. So to try to keep a few bright spots into my director's report and not have it all be bad, we all know that the agricultural community is doing essential work and is facing challenges this year as the water supply has dropped so precipitously. A couple of bright spots that I've seen there is a lot of our CSAs are sold out down here. So, you know, a great way to get those sold out is to have some you know, instability in the food supply chain. And so that's nice to see. And just a personal anecdote, I was in town wearing my mask, social distancing in a parking lot waiting for something, and ran into a rancher who had converted a big chunk of a field into a garden that he's going to share with his neighbors this year. So we're really seeing that sort of community spirit, not only in our small cities down here, but even in our ag community. As far as, you know, what's happening in our communities, there's a lot of work to prepare for and address the pandemic. We have the local maker lab in Durango that fully transitioned over into making PPE in the last couple of months. But I think one thing that's weighing heavily on us right now as we're moving to safer at home is that we have tribal communities in our state, and we have tribal communities just across the state line that, you know, have some unique concerns. And we do have, you know, very concerning levels of the virus in Farmington, which is only about 45 minutes from my house. So some of the unique challenges that we're facing here. Our roundtable is continuing to meet. We met in April, and our Colorado River Committee has met twice since then, and thanks to Director Ryan for coming and presenting to that committee. We've had really good participation, but I will note that access to broadband is definitely posing challenges in parts of our basin. And one really good example of this is watching the different IWMPs and stream management planning processes. So we have one that's sort of headed in a virtual direction, still has a lot of energy in the upper San Juan area. And then we've got our effort on the San Miguel, where the feedback we got is that the broadband access in parts of that community doesn't support people participating on Zoom, and so we're going to have to delay the stakeholder effort until we can find a way to do it in person. So definitely seeing the benefits of like not having to drive 7 hours to meetings in Denver every time we have a meeting, but we're also seeing challenges on the other side with reliable internet access. So unless there are any questions, I will end my report and move us along to the Gunnison River Basin. I'll go ahead, Director Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been a trying time in this basin, of course, with the coronavirus. It did strike pretty close to home here. One of our employee's brother, who I went to grade school with, wife worked in a nursing home and brought him home the coronavirus. She survived, but he didn't. It's a real tragedy, and I feel so sorry for her and that family, obviously. Our roundtable has not met. The way I understand it is our articles of don't allow for meeting on the internet, or at least conducting votes there. So we have not met that way. We did have a kickoff meeting of our BIP committee. Luke Gingrich with JUB, which I feel many of you know is our local expert. We now know who the drip under pressure is, and I believe Luke will do a great job for us. It certainly had a good kickoff meeting, and I look forward to that process. you know, I have some work to do for my project and bringing all the rehabilitation projects we have forward to that list of projects, and I will certainly work to do that. Water-wise, we experienced what John McLeod has termed an April hole this year. That happens when there's no low snow, if you will, and it's cooler in the high country, and we don't get that runoff to meet our demands. We use storage. We used about 6,000 acre feet out of our Taylor storage. And more concerning, by their accounting, we've used 2,000 acre feet out of Ridgeway, which we use in August and September every year to meet the project demands. I've talked with Tri-County and the Bureau of Rec about that, and it's my opinion that we should not be charged for those early season withdrawals, because they've got to drop that reservoir. It's a no spill reservoir, and they've got to drop that reservoir anyway. So what difference does it make if we need it a couple of weeks ahead of time? But we'll see how that goes. I'm not concerned. We've still got some 18,000 acre feet of storage, and quite possibly that will be enough. The Aspinall unit started ramping up to meet the flow requirements in both the Black Canyon and the lower Gunnison on the 19th. And I got an email today that they're already ramping them down. There won't be any slides of spills from Crystal or Morro Point this year. There's not enough water to do that, and we can meet the commitments without it. I did want to mention Ramshorn. I think you've heard me speak to this before. It continues to move forward. It's going to be a long process, though. This would take the peaks off the flows in Cow Creek, which enters Uncompahgre below Ridgeway Reservoir, store them, and then filter them through Ridgeway Reservoir for use later in the year. And of course, Tri-County would be able to produce hydropower with those flows. One other item, the Montrose Economic Development Corporation recognized our association for the impact on the communities in Montrose and Delta County. It's pretty obvious to anyone that's been through this part of the world that this valley would not look the way it does without the Gunnison Tunnel and our association, and providing irrigation water and domestic water. I turn to a personal note. I purchased a Jeep Wrangler this spring, and I've been social distancing all around this valley. I did ride up to Escalante, and I'm ashamed to say that I had not been there before. It's off the Gunnison River between Delta and Grand Junction. What a beautiful setting. We approved today the in-stream flow on Kelso Creek. I don't believe I saw that, but I forded the Escalante Creek several times that day. Last weekend, my wife and I traveled to Moab to check out some of the trails there. I got in some over my head. If I hadn't have been befriended by a group from Fort Collins, I might have been late for this meeting. I'd most certainly been late for my board meeting yesterday. But I look forward to showing you some pictures of the San Juans this summer, and at future meetings, I'll bring some clips of what I find up there this year. That concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I could.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Director Anderson? Seeing none, let's move to the North Platte River Basin with Director Trick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just wanted to say I really wish that we were all in Durango right now together instead of on a Zoom meeting. Being on a Zoom meeting makes you miss the in-person meetings, and just we'll be looking forward to getting back to our regular meeting schedules as usual if we can as soon as possible. So, and I just wanted to say thanks to Director Mitchell and everybody on the staff and everybody at the state and local levels that's working their tails off right now to make sure that we can all pivot with all these changes happening. And just thank you for everything you've done. I think saying thank you a million times wouldn't be enough, but we all recognize your really hard work, and we're glad that we have you, and we'll all get through this together. Like Director Anderson said, we're kind of in an April hole. We had an April hole as well here in our basin. It seemed like it was a really, really cold spring, and it seemed like we just kept waiting for runoff to happen, and it wasn't coming and wasn't coming. And we are actually under call right now on the Michigan River. So I'm not sure if that runoff's going to be late or if it just isn't there. But fortunately, we had a lot of early season reservoir filling going on that if we need to use some reservoir water late in the season, we'll be able to do that. But I don't know what's going on, if it's going to come or if we're just going to be kind of a dry year this year. So I guess we'll see. Other updates, fortunately for me, I don't know anyone with the virus. My family's happy and healthy right now, and I haven't heard of anyone who has it, which I'm very fortunate for, and I hope that everybody else here is all continuing to be healthy and their families are safe. And as you can imagine, it's pretty easy to social distance up around this area, so I've just been taking as many opportunities as I can to get outside and get in the wide open spaces and just take advantage of Colorado outdoors while we're all staying safe at home. As you can imagine also, we are a largely agricultural cattle producing basin, and the supply chain issues that Kate Greenberg mentioned earlier in her report will probably affect us in some way at some point in time in the near future. We're not quite sure how, but we'll have to see how some of those changes play out. I was happy to hear her talk about looking at more local solutions for processing and supply chain issues. So I'm looking forward to seeing what some of those solutions are that we can come up with as a state, because as you can imagine, we'll be largely affected here, and our producers here will be largely affected by the plant shutdowns and supply chain issues that everybody's aware of. And another area that we probably will see more effects of in the upcoming months are our tourism and outdoor recreation. I've talked to a few people around and people that have guiding and fishing companies and outfitting, and they've already had to cancel a lot of May and June trips that they had booked for people, and that's going to have a pretty big impact on our local economy here too. And also obviously with tourism going on, not as much probably this summer, we will see, but there is there are a few bright spots. I've heard of a lot of the camping areas up here are going to be fully booked through Memorial Weekend, so we'll have to see kind of how the tourism thing plays out. But at the, on the same vein, we don't really know what the effects of this are going to be quite yet. So, and as Director Hawkins stated, we also hope that we don't have any wildfire issues this summer, because obviously there's going to be challenges with crews and trying to control those, and nobody knows how that will play out. So hopefully nobody has to deal with that, but we'll keep our fingers crossed here too. Roundtable news. The roundtable was set to meet in March, right after our March meeting. That was swiftly canceled, and we have unfortunately not been able to work out the Zoom issues and the remote meeting issues, so we still have not had a roundtable meeting. They were going to try to meet in May, but we couldn't do the Zoom. We couldn't work that out, so that's been postponed. The biggest topic of business for that was going to be largely the VIP update and having our local expert come and present. So that's on hold for the immediate future. Not sure. It'll probably have to be determined when we know when the next meeting is going to be for that. So, and we also have some of the rural area broadband issues with the Zoom and those kinds of meetings. So the roundtable chair decided it was better just to postpone that for now. So I think that's all of the news that I have, and I'll take any questions if there are any, and otherwise I will conclude my report.
Thanks. Are there any questions for Director Trick? Seeing none, let's move on to the South Platte Basin. Director Yan.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And I just want to commend you on handling this meeting. This is not an easy thing to do, so I'm glad you're the chair. Good job. And I also am with Director Trick, and probably the rest of you, that we'd much rather be in Durango. So we finally set up a meeting in Durango, and this happens. Sorry about that. We'll have to get another one soon, hopefully.
We'll get you guys back down here at some point.
Okay. You know, here it's been business as usual. We're a rural area, mainly agriculture, so pretty much everybody is considered essential, except for the restaurants and churches. So that's everything except those. So we haven't seen the impact of this as much. So, but as Director Trick said, with the supply chain on the beef, it will hit some of us later, and some of us it's happening now. I know I talked to one of our feedlot operators, a smaller one, and back in March, he went to sell some of his beef that were ready, and they told him to check back with them in June. So that's not an easy thing to do when you have cattle ready to go, and you're trying to feed them for another couple of months. So it makes it difficult, and your profits go away quickly. So other than that, though, things are going really well here. As you look at different things, the camping has opened up at both North Sterling and Pruitt reservoirs, and so we've had a pretty big influx of people from the Front Range coming out here because they want to come out here where everybody's social distancing, but it's good, and we expect a big weekend at North Sterling. The walleye are biting. I get a reservoir measurement down on the boat ramp every day, and there's fishermen down there, so I check the fishing status, and apparently the walleye are hitting right now. So if you like to fish for walleye, you can come on out to the North Sterling Reservoir. As far as the snow or the river, Vivian put up for you the Lower South Platte Water Conservancy District website. And so I like to show this every once in a while. Vivian, if you could scroll down just a little bit, down to where we can see Kersey. So right there, hold it right there. So right up here in the blue, you can see Kersey gauge, and it's 492 CFS. There you go. Yeah, so that's a little below average for this time of year. A lot of times we have the snowpack that's starting to come out, but it happens from time to time that the snowpack, we don't see it until we get a rain event. But we look at the Kersey gauge because that's where the last major tributary comes into the river, and that's the Cache-la-Poudre River. And so we kind of, down here on the central and lower part of the river, we watch the Kersey gauge to see what's going on. So if you, Vivian, if you want to click on, you can see our canal. So this is every ditch and every river gauge from Chatfield Reservoir to the state line. And it's in order of how it appears on the river. But if Vivian, down on the North Sterling Canal, if you want to just click on that, down a little right there. So that's the ditch that feeds the North Sterling Reservoir. Hopefully it pops up here. Maybe I just, oh, there it is. Okay, so you can see 10 days ago on May, so this is a 10-day graph, on May 10th, we had a little over 400 CFS coming into the reservoir. We actually started running water out on April 27th for irrigation. So we dropped the reservoir a little bit because we couldn't keep up with the demand. But now our demand has subsided a little bit because we had some rain. But we had 420 CFS coming in, and now you can see yesterday they called us out. Our water right is 1914 direct flow right, and today the call on the South Platte River, if you want to go back, just hit the back arrow, Vivian, and then scroll down right there. The call is a 1902, which is actually fairly junior for the South Platte, so it's a 1902 Harmony ditch. And then you can see at the very bottom it says 125 CFS going out of the state at Julesburg, and the compact, we are required from April 1st to October 15th to deliver 120 cubic feet per second to the state of Nebraska on a right of 1897. So if you're senior to 1897, you can still divert. If you're junior to 1897, you are curtailed. So the interesting thing, as you saw up above, the Kersey gauge was 492 CFS. We have 125 CFS going out of the state, but we are diverting between those 2 points 1,248 CFS. So that's just one of those things I like to point out on the return flows of the river. So the diverts, the river comes whole again. So we're actually diverting, you know, if you subtract 492 or 125 from 492, you know, we're diverting 4 or 5 times the amount of water that's actually in the river. So those are all part of our return flows. If you want to switch to my slideshow, Vivian, and I'll show you our snowpack graph. We actually had a good snowpack. The reservoirs are still pretty full. We're 95% full in the North Sterling. And so you can see here, we actually had 100, right at peak, we had 120% of normal. But since then, it's pretty much going straight down, which it does every year. So we're about at the average mark for this time of year. So that, you know, sometimes we'll get a few snows even later. And we actually, I was looking at the weather forecast, we have a 95% chance of rain tonight. So that's good at about 8 o'clock. So we're excited to have some more rain, and we hope that Jessica gets some too, so it perks up the river a little bit for us. So that's where our snowpack is. As far as our roundtable, we did have a roundtable meeting, and we had one in April and May, and we virtually had everybody there, virtually. So it's been working pretty good for us, and we got into our BIP a little bit, and we have a subcommittee of the Metro and South Platte that meet together to help our local expert and the general contractor with that. So we're we're proceeding forward. And then just to close, I just thought I'd show you some pictures to get your mind off other things, but this is out at my ranch here, and my daughter was down and she took a couple pictures. So it's calving season, of course, and if you want to go to the next one, this is the calf by itself. So nice little, it's not number 9. I know a lot of you thought I should put number 9 on, but I didn't. And then the next one, just last, I want to show the next one, just yesterday. If you can see, there's 2 calves there. I had twins. We don't often have twins with cattle, and they're almost identical. I can't really tell them apart. So there's one a little bit to the back and left of the cow and one right in front. So that's what's happening out on the Yon Ranch here right now. So it's kind of it's a windy day today, about 30 miles an hour, and it's about 84 degrees. So it's kind of hot and dry, but we're expecting some rain. So that's good. And then I'll just leave you with the final picture that I'd like to leave, and that's just from my porch. So I'm socially distanced significantly from my neighbor, about 1.5 miles, and so I think and safe, but I haven't been staying home. So we've been, it is a lot different here because the farmers are used to it. When I go to talk to farmers, we still shake hands. We do all this stuff that maybe we're not supposed to cover. That's kind of the status in the South Platte Basin. Take any questions?
Are there any questions for Director Yon? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Arkansas River Basin. Director Felt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I talked to Becky yesterday, I guess, and she said, try to be positive, try not to talk about COVID-19 too much. And I got to tell you, 10 weeks ago tomorrow, I left my first CWCB meeting in Denver and rushed home to chair a kind of a roundtable meeting with other community leaders about COVID-19. And so that was on the Thursday, 4 o'clock or so. I felt we were moving towards an emergency declaration, and kind of towards the end of the meeting, I was just kind of, I don't know, intuitively feeling like people weren't really with me on that. And I finally said, shake your head if you don't think I should do an emergency declaration. And everyone shook their head, 25 people. And so I said, okay, I guess I'm wrong here. The next day, we declared an emergency with full support of the same group. So, I think maybe it was just that I had been at CWCB in Denver and listening to Dan Gibbs in particular, and also Kate Greenberg talking about sort of the big picture from the state, and was very much impacted by that, where my fellows, it hadn't quite hit them. 12 hours later or so, they were ready to go. Over the last 10 weeks, I've never done a Zoom meeting before. I've done over 100 now, and over half of those, I've been the chairman. So Celine, you have my appreciation and admiration for how you've handled this one today. It is very challenging to participate and manage and do multi-screens and all that stuff. In addition, I think, my life has changed a lot. I used to drive 400 or 500 miles a week. Now I got through up to yesterday on 1 tank of gas since that CWCB meeting. I drive 1 mile to my county office, 1 mile to my fly shop, 1 mile home. Just total change in life. What we've tried to do here in Chaffee County, and frankly in the Upper Basin, because our county has kind of taken a lead and tried to be inclusive and encouraging of our fellows like Fremont, Custer, and Lake counties, is honestly, George said it really good earlier, if I got him right, create a culture of resiliency, stability, and ingenuity. And that is indeed what we've been trying to do. So, we quickly realized that we were a lot stronger as a community down here if we all worked together than if we got into our little silos of county and different municipalities and school districts and all that. So we brought everybody together, and every day or every weekday since March 12th, we've had that roundtable meeting. We have 35 to 45 participants every day, all the mayors, all the administrators, the superintendents, many department heads, sheriff, you know, just the whole crew, anyone you could think of is in on these roundtables. And together we have marched forward, you know, dealing with each challenge that has come along as we've moved into stay at home, and then, which was fairly simple in a way, to safer at home, which has become incredibly complex and very confusing, often kind of inconsistent messaging from the state that we're then having to interpret on the local level. And as I mentioned to Becky, and I mentioned it to Celine a few weeks back, you know, as you all know, you know, this is where the rubber hits the road. It's at the local level. There's nobody really below the county commissioners that are going to be dealing with implementation of things like safer at home in it from an authority perspective, aside from the public health directors. And so it has been very challenging to find that path between economic health and public health, and to find that path between sort of authority and authoritarianism. It's almost an impossible mission, and we just kind of remind ourselves that somebody has to deal with this, and turns out it's us. So in that context, you know, I had mentioned at the last meeting, we had the nation's top priority wildfire last fall. We've been working on post-fire recovery, feverishly trying to implement an EWP program with NRCS prior to what are hopefully some good monsoons this summer. But we have had, almost since the day that I left Denver, it seems like our snowpack has been diving hard. And with that, we're in stage 2 fire restrictions, Forest Service, BLM, and county. Can't smoke a cigarette, can't have a campfire, anything like that. And now, on top of all that, we have like the #1 sort of law enforcement case going on, probably in the whole Rocky Mountain region, with a missing woman, local woman here. And I'm just going to stick with the sheriff's line that it's a missing person case because we haven't located her, but it's very concerning to our community. And so there's a lot of stress. It's just all there is to it. And that's how it feels around here, just as a community. In terms of kind of the water scene, you know, I was sort of grateful that Upper Ark, Southeastern, and the Basin Roundtable, which I all participate in, all 3 of those actively, they all took a break initially and gave me a little more time to focus. And then more recently have started up all virtually. And that's been great, as is this, to talk about something more positive and kind of just, I don't know, that's more what I like to think about. And so those meetings have resumed. We had a great report from Russ down at the Basin Roundtable about the BIP local expert program a week ago. And Upper Ark's moving forward on stuff. Tomorrow, Southeastern meets, and the May meeting is when we do our allocations of Fry Ark water. I was really shocked to see they were still projecting 62,000 acre feet of imports, because to me, you know, that's the Bureau of Reclamation down in Pueblo, and in times like this, I often don't trust their modeling that well compared to what I can just see out my window up here. And I was happy this morning to see that Southeastern's going to be allocating based on 70% of the projection, so we don't over allocate, and then we'll see what happens later. But we had an early runoff, kind of started early here because it's been so warm, and we have some dust on snow. But honestly, the wind's been blowing, and that snow's just disappearing really quick. And you know, we're in a red flag warning. We're in a red flag stance every day because of our fire restrictions, but we're in actual red flag warning for the last 3 days. So we're just seeing real dry conditions. And the farther east you go and farther southeast you go, the worse it gets. We've had 5 grass or brush fires in our county in the last 2 weeks. And, you know, it's just really alarming. Things are really dry. We haven't really had green up yet, so we're in like the spring bad spot. It'll get better for a while probably as the irrigation kicks in and just plants green up. And then, you know, unless we get a lot of rain, it's probably going to get worse on us here. soon. I think, you know, if there's a good thing going on, and there are, you know, I think it is people slowing down a bit and thinking about priorities and maybe noticing. I've had so many people talking about birds and bird song, and I don't think the birds are doing anything different. I think it's just people are quieter and slower and paying attention, noticing the birds nesting in their yards and stuff like that. We have we're famous for this caddisfly hatch here on the Arkansas River in the spring. They basically got pretty well wiped out back in 2008 by combination of some big winter storms and spring storms and some water management decisions that just kept the river really cold, and the bugs didn't hatch, and they never made it and laid their eggs, and the whole population crashed. That population has been very, very slowly rebuilding itself, but it's one of those kind of exponential things, you know, 2 make 4, make 8, make 16, et cetera, until you know, 1 billion, 2 billion, 4 billion. And this year, boy, it just exploded. Unfortunately, as a county, we were closed to visitation. Our guide service was shut down, our fly shop was shut down for the most part. But boy, bugs were back, fish were chowing, and it just was like, man, Mother Nature doesn't really care what's going on with Chaffee County government or any of us, probably, for that matter. And it, you know, there's a lot of just beautiful things going on in the world, as everybody's photos attest to, and Jim's cows are demonstrating. So I think that's probably what I want to say. Really challenging. I do feel bad for Dan Gibbs and Dan Prenslow. We have been hammering them a bit because of some of the inconsistent directions we're getting from the state. But we have to call those out in order to try and you know, get people to understand what it's like on the ground here, and to just try and keep doing better at this, because gosh, if nothing else, we got to learn from this experience. So I've learned a lot. We always say you don't learn anything on a 50 fish day. In other words, it takes adversity to learn the big lessons in life, and this is certainly one of them. And so trying to keep that attitude, keep our heads up, and just taking it 1 hour at a time. Think about you all often. That was, you know, my first meeting. It's made a big impression on me. You guys are a really amazing group, both the staff and my fellow directors, and you know, the agency folks that are here. And so I'm really grateful to be a part of this. I hope we can resume meeting in person someday, and because it sounds like a lot of fun. But until then, I'm in the same little box every day doing my thing.
Thanks. Are there any questions for Director Felt? Well, seeing none, let's move to City and County of Denver.
I think Director Dutton may have had a question.
Oh, I am sorry. I cannot see you, Heather. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for catching me, Director Brody. Director Felt, I just wanted to highlight, I noticed that Chaffee County was awarded a pretty substantial restore grant recently for your forest project. And so congrats on that. You know, CWCB and CPW had a role in that brand new funding program, and you guys really cleaned up. So congrats on that big success.
Thank you. I think if there's one thing that one ball I've kept my eye on, aside from COVID during this past 10 weeks, it's been forest health and wildfire mitigation and post-fire recovery. And so we also got, that was, I think, a $360,000 award. We also got $724,000 in NRCS funding for our EWP program. And then I think we got, in addition to some of the money that was given to the Arkansas River Watershed Collaborative at our last meeting, they scored another $150,000 for post-fire recovery from a CDPHE grant too. So we've been pulling in a lot of money and you know, really refining this program that we're building out of our new community wildfire protection plan. And yeah, I wish I was spending my time on that, but we've got some really good people here that are kind of carrying the ball. So thank you, Director Dutton. We are excited to get back to work on that.
Congratulations, Director Felt. So I I can't help but talk about COVID because that frankly has been our focus since our last meeting. In fact, some of you may recall I had to bolt out a little early of our last meeting because we were getting ready to announce to our entire operations that we were going to be moving to telework on the following Monday. So we have been working remotely for the last couple of months. I'll talk about some of the challenges that we've faced and then some of the positives that have come out of this experience. So in terms of challenges, we did activate our COOP plan, our continuity of operations plan, and we've been operating under various iterations of that plan for the last 10 weeks or so. In terms of our response to COVID, we immediately stopped shutoffs of customers for non-payment or for late payment. We also proactively turned service back on to any customers who had been disconnected because of non-payment issues. I think in terms of our operations, the biggest challenge we've faced has been the supply chain. We do have a number of normal, just everyday operations that require PPE, and in particular N95 masks for dust protection. And it's been a real challenge to acquire the supplies that we need in order to protect our workers and make sure that they can continue to do their jobs in a safe way. And I'll get to some of the successes of how we've worked through that. We've also been challenged to find new ways to do our work. So you can imagine, with an operation as big as ours, we've got crews in the streets, we've got folks running our water treatment plants all over town. And we've really been challenged to figure out how to do that in a way that maintains social distancing and protects both our employees and our customers. In particular, our main replacement work, which is something we do, every spring through fall, we've had to figure out how to do that in a way that minimizes any disruptions in service while people are sheltering in place. So normally we would want to do that work during the day while people are at work or at school, but now with everybody sheltering in place, we've tried to figure out how can we cut those service interruption timelines, and does it make sense to do some of that work at night while there's a lower demand for water. Also, with regard to our lead line replacement program, we did have to temporarily slow down on replacing the lines because doing so requires contractors to go into homes to make those service connections. And so we had to pause until we could get some new protocols in place to make sure that we were protecting our workers and also our customers as we were making those connections. But the good news is we have ramped that work back up. I also share the concern raised by a number of the directors regarding wildfires, and I just thought I'd give one example of how COVID is impacting fire response. So background, April 25th, there was a fire that started in the Hayman burn scar area. As I understand it, it was caused by target shooting near National Forest land. In this case, the Forest Service response was delayed because the incident commander was working from home in Denver and there were no other nearby engines. So instead of having equipment positioned where it normally would be, which would have facilitated a faster response, it took longer to get the response to the fire to address it. Another challenge that the Forest Service faced in responding to the incident was the number of folks recreating and parking along the road, which made it take longer to get the engine to the fire area. So that's just, an added complication that I think we're going to have to think about as people are working remotely. How do we make sure that we still have people and equipment positioned so that if and when fires do occur, we've got the right resources to be able to respond to them quickly. They were able to contain the fire. North Fork did respond. They were the first on scene. But it was sort of an interesting and telling story, I think, in terms of some of the added challenges that we're all going to face in terms of fire health this season. Recreation has also been a challenge. We've seen a huge increase in the number of people wanting to come and enjoy the recreation areas near town, in part because they can't necessarily get up and enjoy them in the rest of the state. And, you know, it's really stressed our recreation areas, and it's stressed our staff just in terms of managing it, making sure that people are behaving responsibly, that they're practicing social distancing, et cetera. And as I think you heard from some of the CWCB staff, I think just morale and in managing the stress of having to work from home, particularly for our folks who are also parenting young kids, has really been a challenge, given the shutdown of most schools and most childcare facilities, throughout the state and especially in the metro area. So turning to the positives, what's gone well? First, our continuity of operations plan worked. All the drills, all the planning we had done, I'm sure Director Felt has been through this too. The planning worked, and it was very helpful. We had the resources. We could get people set up and working remotely. We've got really good bench strength. We've made sure that we can continue to provide our vital services. We serve in total about 1.5 million people, about a quarter of the state's population. So it's essential for us and for our customers that we can continue to supply water without interruption across the metro area. And it's nice to know that all of that planning and all of those drills and exercises, whether they were live or tabletops, has really helped position us to respond quickly and nimbly to the situation we faced. Another good lesson has been scenario planning. So in our line of work, in the water world, we're all used to scenario planning. Usually it's because we're trying to manage drought, we're trying to manage flooding, we're trying to manage, an uncertain supply. But all of those tools and just that mindset of having to be prepared, to be nimble, and make responsible decisions at, as late as we possibly can, have been really helpful in thinking about how to respond to COVID. So in this case, not only are we looking at water supply, we're looking at economic conditions, we're looking at employment conditions, we're looking at viral loads, and we're developing scenarios that we can act upon if and when necessary to make sure that we are being responsible with our ratepayers' money, being responsible with our water, and that we can continue to supply all of our customers, and especially any critical facilities, which there are many in our area. Another positive, the technology and teleworking, while it's certainly imperfect, has actually gone pretty well. Just one example, we've had 2 Metro Roundtable meetings so far remotely. I think we've had really good attendance. While it's not perfect, I think the tools that we have generally worked pretty well and have allowed us to continue the critical business and the critical planning that we need to do. So I think that's been a surprise that we can work as successfully as we have been able to when we're all dispersed. So that'll be interesting to see how that affects how we do our work going forward. We've also taken advantage of some opportunities just resulting from reduced traffic and reduced people in the downtown area. So for example, we have a couple of big main projects that we've been able to do while traffic loads are lighter, that have allowed us to accelerate some work, save cost, and get critical work done with minimum disruption to our customers. So that's been a positive as well. And similarly on our lead program, while we were slowing down on doing the residential line replacements, we shifted and we've replaced schools, daycare facilities, commercial and retail that otherwise would have been farther down the line due to the complexity of getting those larger lines replaced. But we took advantage of the fact that those establishments were closed to get some of those critical lines replaced. I think for me, one of the biggest positives is just seeing the ingenuity and generosity of people, not just within Denver Water, but really across the region and across the state. And I'll give you some examples. So I mentioned earlier the challenges that we've had in terms of securing PPE and face masks. Well, we had a handful of Denver Water employees who decided that they were going to use their 3D printers and they were going to figure out how to make masks for people using their 3D printers and actually the filter material from your furnace filters, which is actually pretty effective. So we've had employees home printing masks to protect their colleagues who are doing work out in the street who need masks for dust protection. We've also had a small army of volunteers across Denver Water making homemade masks. We passed out fabric, we passed out patterns, and people have been turning in masks to protect employees who don't necessarily need the same level of dust protection, but just need some face covering for their work in various facilities. So those are a couple of really positive stories I think that have come out of this. Another one that I want to highlight, which has really been a statewide effort, we've worked with FEMA, an entity called COWARN, which is Colorado Water Wastewater Agency Response Network, and CDPHE to secure PPE to be distributed to water and wastewater providers across the state. And I just want to take a moment to recognize the Colorado Rural Water Association, Parker Water and Sanitation, Denver Water, and the state and COWARN and FEMA for putting this together. So the entities I mentioned, Denver Water, Colorado Rural Water Association, Parker Water and Sanitation, volunteered warehouse space to receive these masks and distribute them out to water and wastewater providers across the state. Denver Water is even shipping them for free for utilities that can't come in and pick them up conveniently from one of those locations. And starting last week, we've begun distribution of 30,000 masks to utilities across the state. We anticipate that about 120 utilities from across the state will participate and benefit from this effort. And this was a grassroots-led effort of utilities coming together with COWARN, with the state, reaching out to FEMA, saying, hey, we have a need, can you help us? We're willing to help ourselves if you can help provide the supply. So again, while this has been a real challenge, it's been really gratifying to me to see the communities rally together, the utilities rally together to make sure that we have the resources needed to continue to provide critical services across the state of Colorado. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Director Brody? Well, thanks for sharing the bright spots. Director Schwartz.
And thank you. I just wanted to share that Asta Parker was part of the presentation from Denver Water on the water reuse and really spoke about existing and future opportunities. So just want to acknowledge her contribution as part of Denver Water as well.
Thanks.
Great. Well, seeing no other hands, let's move to the Rio Grande. Director Dutton.
Okay, great. I have some pretty pictures. We're going to start with the not great news because there's some not great news. So am I in charge, Vivian, or are you in charge? Looks like you're still in charge. Okay, next slide, please. Maybe. All right. So the not great news is that a couple days ago, we were, I think that says 13% of average. And so a lot of what Director Felt was saying really hits home for us that we just had a free fall since our last meeting. And our division engineer noted that April, it broke records for being the hottest and driest and windiest. And I think everybody, on this call, although the water folks know what that does to a snowpack. And so we went from peaking at about average to being in pretty rough shape. So let's go to the next slide. I think, okay, thanks. So you can see here that, we're the south end of the state is just not in good shape. So I guess we'll lock arms down here that it's kind of a scary year. And I think that as others have said, you know, the low flows and potential fire risks and all the implications of that are definitely on all of our minds. This was as of yesterday. Next slide, please. So, oh wow, you can't see this at all, but since I have my cursor, I can show you guys. This is the long term, this is the history of the Rio Grande at Del Norte gauge, which is the index gauge for the Rio Grande Compact. And so you can see, you know, average is around between 620 and 640,000 acre feet. And as of the May 11th forecast, we're forecasted to have 64% of average. So 415,000, I put a hold in there to show what that would be. Last year was so great. The year before was pretty awful. This is what's being forecasted right now. And before the forecast before that one, we were at 440,000. And before that, we were at even more. And so with every forecast and these continued warm, dry, windy times, it just continues to drop us down. And I think anxiety, or I know anxiety is building. With that, we have to send 25% of that total down to New Mexico, to the state line, for our compact obligation. And so with the curtailment that's already happened and the deliveries that will have and will happen outside of the irrigation season, 4% of our water users are currently being curtailed. And our division engineer thinks that the river peaked about 10 days ago. And so we're already on the downswing. And historically, the river peaks around June 9th, the first week of June. And so yeah, it's setting up to potentially be a kind of rough year. Next slide. But it is not all bad news. There are some super exciting things happening, and you know, we always know how to do more with less and squeeze some happiness out of every drop that we can. And so some really exciting news was that the Del Norte Riverfront project, which is just a few miles outside my window, was completed this spring. And so there's already been people out there enjoying it on their kayaks. And then as flows continue to drop and get a little bit more appropriate for the novices, it'll be good for paddle boarding and boogie boarding and inner tubing. And so it's really exciting to have this project just in my backyard and in a community that is generally underserved, and in an area where we have this incredible resource in our backyards, but people didn't really have a way to interact with the river and to just get in it and play in it. And so it's really exciting to see the investment that was made. You know, significant GOCO money and CWCB grant money went into, and you know, tons of local sponsors, of course, went into this great project. And so we're really excited about it, and really excited to have a big celebration as soon as that is an appropriate thing to do. Next slide, please. And we are hard at work with our Basin Plan update, and I just really want to give an incredible shout out and thanks to CWCB staff for the way that you've been so nimble, and you've just pivoted and immediately said, okay, we had these, you know, had the local expert meetings and the kickoff meetings planned. It's not going to work how we planned, and it seemed like there was no time spent crying over spilled milk. You guys just totally sorted it out, and the feedback that I've heard was that the webinars were super effective, and the ones that I was part of for conversations about our basin, you know, were just incredibly well run and facilitated. And so I just want to continue to commend everybody on staff for your resilience and ability to still get stuff done even when things are out of the ordinary. And we're really excited because our local expert for the Basin Plan update is going to be the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. And so Emma and Daniel are pictured there cheesing it up at Plateau Reservoir. Daniel has been our stream management plan coordinator for the last couple of years. And so we feel that he's the perfect person to lead us on this effort, since he's got planning on the brain and has done so much to build connections in the community and really get to know all of the data that's available, and then the data that we need to update the plan. And so we're excited about having Daniel and Emma leading this, and especially about the opportunity that, you know, our basin chose to look within, and we're really pleased that we were able to have a local entity be a local expert, because it adds that economic value and, you know, builds jobs in the valley. And so we're really pleased that was able to come to fruition, and I'm just really excited for these guys. I know they'll do a great job. Daniel's already been having committee meetings. We've got an agriculture committee, environment and rec, administration, and education. I think that's it. There's 5 of them, but I can't see that great. But and municipal, we've got municipal and industrial. And so we have our different community committees who have already got together and talked about what they see the needs are for our plan going forward. And yeah, we're hitting the ground running. Next slide, please. So even though things have been, I think, different for the rest of the world, you know, life goes on. And as Director Jan was saying, there are definitely parts of Colorado that are seeing this COVID deal a lot differently. I mean, we're kind of experts in social distancing down here, and it's, you know, people I think are adjusting. I'm seeing masks and things in different farm stores and the way that people are doing things, but baby cows and sheep were born, and potatoes were planted, and barley was planted, and alfalfa is already growing and looking great, making my backyard not just a pile of weeds. So I've got my neighbor's alfalfa field is like a lawn for me. It pretties up the view out of the window. And so I think that keeps us going. It keeps us hopeful that, you know, there's that consistency, that ag is carrying on and doing what they've always done. And even though the rest of us are trying to sort out, well, how do we keep things going by, you know, looking at each other like the Brady Bunch? They're doing what they do, and it's great to see. Next slide, please. Another really neat thing that's come out of this whole deal, I really wanted to highlight the efforts of a local conservation organization, the Rio Grande Headwaters Land Trust. They're a frequent offender at CWCB and have gotten quite a few grants to do the work that they do, which is land and water conservation. But they saw the need. They have offices over here in Del Norte, and recognized that with schools closing, there would be a significant population that might not have food security. And so they and the High Valley Community Center got together and recognized that not only do we need to worry about kids, but we need to worry about, you know, folks living on the poverty line and the elderly that might not have access to groceries and to cooking and you know, just with everything changing. And so these guys called some of their regular funders and came up with a pretty incredible amount of money overnight, and then did a big fundraising campaign. And so here's a group that normally, you know, conserves farms and ranches, and there's Danny out there moving food that so with the grants and the money that they raised, they were able to buy food from local farms and then get that food in the hands of local restaurants who prepared meals that were distributed around the community. And so I just wanted to highlight kind of the beauty of living in a small town and people being there for each other and being resilient and seeing that need and being like, okay, this isn't at all what we do, but it's what we should do. And it's pretty awesome. Next slide. One of the things, another fun thing that we did, our organization wanted to take the opportunity to try to think about water education in a new way. And so we did a poster or a drawing contest where we connected kids with a project wet lesson and then said, draw your water cycle. So take this lesson of the water cycle and then draw the valley water cycle. And we did a big competition and had all kinds of different age classes and said, okay, who are the best ones? And we ended up giving prizes to everyone because they were all so stinking cute and so good. And so this is Lizzie. She got the first place for second, third, and fourth grade. My favorite is she's walking her cat, I think, actually. Oh no, her cat's over here. she's walking her dog, she's got a crane. And so to see this little 8-year-old's drawing was pretty adorable. Next slide. We've got the next age group. This is JC, and JC's dad is actually a water engineer, and he said though that he didn't help her at all. She did everything, and so she's got herself fishing at Continental Reservoir and all the little animals. We were laughing that her cows have kind of big ears. They're like Mickey Mouse cows, but our little 4th grader. So she was the champion of that class. And then the last one was a middle schooler, if you can go to the next slide, Vivian. And hers just blew us all away with the detail and just, I mean, what a talented kid. Is it stuck or can we go down? There we go. If you really zoom in on the detail on this one, well, there were so many great, I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite because everybody added their personality into it. But if you just look at all the detail with her cranes, she's got the sand dunes. She has her favorite activity is climbing trees with her sister. And so this was just such a bright point for me. And I feel like we should do this contest every week because as they rolled in, getting to see all the creativity, it was really special. And so I just wanted to highlight that, yeah, things are different. Things have been kind of tough, but there's still been a lot of really awesome things happening. If you can go to my final slide, Vivian. And then here's my picture from my porch. And just want to end by saying thanks again to everybody, for all the staff, for your incredible work and just being available and still serving Coloradans and representing us with the utmost class. And I hope that everybody is hanging in there and staying safe and healthy and taking time to recharge and recognizing that someday we'll all be able to hug again. And all the non-huggers better get ready because I've been pent up, so I'm coming for you. But in all seriousness, I've missed you guys and hope everybody's okay, and I'm excited to see you again. And that's my report.
Well, thank you. Does anybody have questions for Director Dutton? Well, thanks for sharing those bright spots, and let's move on to the Yampa White with Director Brown.
Good afternoon. I'll be quick, both because my internet is not doing so hot and because I know we're really past schedule. So I'll just reiterate, oops, can you hear me? I'm gone.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you. Good.
So, okay, thank you. We had a big October, January, and February. That's really what saved our basin. Also experienced the April hole here in the Northwest. But we've had a gorgeous spring. It's been warmer, rainy, windy, green. It's beautiful here right now, so grateful. This is the longest stretch I personally have ever spent night after night, and so it's been pretty cool. Big news in our basin is that the Yampa Fund that many of you remember that we set up last year, we just were able to give out our first $250,000 in grant money. And so that's a really exciting step for us. And, you know, everyone here in Northwest Colorado is used to resiliency being the name of the game. So I think that all of our meetings and basin roundtables, subcommittees, all of our water meetings continue on. People have adjusted their bylaws. They've bucked up and realized that we aren't going to have Zoom calls here in the basin. We just don't have the internet for it. So maybe we'll get one person whose video you can see when they're speaking, but everybody's just done an awesome job of keeping the work going and staying positive, lots of community coming together. I will tell you that there is a
There is a tragedy in Steamboat right now that Tornado the llama has escaped his backyard, and he's on the lamb, which seems like it should be on the llama, running around town, and he cannot be found nor caught. So if you want to stay up to date on that humorous story, you can go to the Steamboat Pilot and check that out. See if Tornado will be found or not. And with that, I will pass it back. We will skip the book report I was going to give, unfortunately, but I will show you that I just read this in my COVID spare time about faring.
Well, I can't hear Director Brown anymore, so maybe if you have a burning question for her, we can do it later in the meeting. And let's move on to agenda item 15, Attorney General's report, legal briefing, and executive session.
All right, thank you. It was really great to hear all those briefings. I don't know if people can see, I'm wearing a t-shirt which is Startup Colorado Think Rural. And if anyone wants to get hooked up to Startup Colorado, it's a great organization supporting entrepreneurship in rural areas of the part of the state. I helped found the organization. It was a tough choice which t-shirt to wear because I also have my Rio Grande. I know Pat's was encouraged. And then I don't know if Jackie's back, but we've also got the Western Colorado t-shirt as well. So in any event, even though I can't be traveling around the state, I can have reminders of really the wonderful people and places. And like others, I am a hugger and look forward to being able to acknowledge the warm bonds that many of us feel and aren't able to express in the same way during this time. Let me pick up on the themes that have been talked about. I loved Russ George's structure of ingenuity and resilience, and I'll add a little bit about grace to that. The amazing reaction that Bruce Talbot had, who many of you know, who suffered as much as anyone in the Palisade Peach freeze that Gail Schwartz talked about, was an attitude of we're going to get through this, that we're problem solvers here and we'll figure our way through it. Our office has done an amazing job. Amy's leadership has really been tremendous, as has Scott Steinbrecher, many of you know, is now Amy's assistant deputy, and also Lane has come on to take over the first assistant role. We have now worked from home for almost a couple of months, and people have done that pretty seamlessly. We've also had to change the work we've done in response to COVID-19. We're now getting all sorts of scams and price gouging that we're looking into. And I do think ingenuity is a core Colorado value that we're seeing a lot of. Resilience is something I really can't say enough about in terms of the need for us to bounce back. And I would also underscore the lack of resilience. When we see that, we need to pay attention and learn from it, whether it's in water, and there's plenty of important lessons there we've got to keep learning, but also things like supply chain for food and agriculture. We've seen some odd things happening in the beef market with respect to how much money ranchers are getting paid and how much money is being charged to consumers. So with other state AGs, bipartisan basis, we've called for an examination of what's going on there, and we'll be working with the feds on that front as well. On the broadband front tomorrow, I'll lead another bipartisan coalition of AGs on getting support for broadband. And for those of you who are seeing that challenge in your communities, please follow up with me in my office. We'd like to work together to help you on that front. It's a big part of resilience during these times. Also, our team was able to bring a case before the U.S. Supreme Court, which I had the distinct pleasure and honor of arguing last week remotely, involving our electors and the need for them to follow Colorado law and vote the way the people of Colorado law expect them to. So that was a blast. And then on grace, a number of people referred to points here, but I do think it merits note that there are a lot of people who are hurting, and it warmed my heart to hear the food security efforts being done. In our office, we're working on these issues. SNAP benefits are something we're concerned about being restricted during this time. And of course, healthcare. Actually, the healthcare itself is now actually before the U.S. Supreme Court and a real concern. So that's a bit what we're working on. We really are excited to work with all of you in every way we can. We've got a little bit to do in executive session. We've got a legal briefing that we're going to offer. Before Amy gets to the legal briefing, any questions people have for me?
Director Brody.
Not a question, but I just wanted to congratulate you, Attorney General Weiser, on an excellent oral argument last week, and bonus points for working in Frodo Boggins. That's impressive.
It was a real treat that I had the chance to reference my love of Tolkien in that argument. For those who are not familiar with this, Justice Clarence Thomas doesn't often ask questions because I think from a stylistic standpoint, he doesn't like the firing squad motif of usual Supreme Court arguments. Because this was done remotely, they went justice by justice, and he had the chance to ask questions, and he asked one about Frodo Baggins, which was awesome, and I was able to refer back to it, so that was fun. Thank you.
Well, you did an excellent job representing the state of Colorado. Thank you.
Well, seeing no other hands and nothing in the chat, let's move into the legal briefing.
Great, thanks. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Super. As you know, we've provided our Attorney General's report. It's in the materials, and are Lane and Jen able to answer questions if you have any? The team is here, and if you have any questions, public questions about the report before you move into executive session, now's the time to ask them.
Director Dudden, did I see a hand or? Okay. Seeing none, we can move to executive session.
Okay, and now pursuant to statute, I recommend the board make a motion to go into executive session to consider items 16A and B as identified on the board's agenda. The session's authorized pursuant to the provisions of sections 24.6, 402(3)(a)(2) and 3, and other laws that allow the board to enter into executive session. So we need a motion.
I see Director Yan's hand first. And Director Yan, did you make the motion? Just clarifying. All right, motion by Director Yan to move into executive session, seconded by Director Brody. Any discussion? Seeing none, if you oppose or need to abstain, signify by raising your hand or putting it in the chat. Seeing none, the motion is approved. We will now move into executive session. Just a point of order, we are going to be moving platforms into the executive session platform. So you are going to need to leave this meeting and enter into that separate link, which you have in your email box. If you have any questions, staff should be available to help with that. We do need a little bit of time to make that transition, so we will take our 15 minutes and reconvene at 4:04.
This conference will now be recorded.
We're going to resume the CWCB meeting now, and we will start with agenda item 17, report from executive session. Councilor Beatty. And you are on mute, Councilor Beatty.
Helps if I'm not on mute. We are now at item 17, the report from executive session. Pursuant to statute, the board went into executive session to consider agenda items 16A and B. Discussion was limited to those items and no formal action was taken. We are now out of executive session.
Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item 18, litigation fund.
Hi, this is Amy Ostick, CWCB staff, and I am back to provide a staff recommendation on agenda item 18, the litigation fund. And I believe we have a slide with the staff recommendation, and I'll go ahead and read it. Staff recommends that the board authorize the expenditure of a total of $1,517,090 for litigation-related activities in fiscal year 2020 to 2021 as follows. $893,090 for the Colorado River Basin, $98,000 for the Republican River Basin, and $525,000 for the Rio Grande Basin. Staff further recommends that the board direct the CWCB director and staff to expend these funds consistent with the request by the Office of the Attorney General, and direct the CWCB director, CWCB staff, and Office of the Attorney General to comply with the annual reporting requirements as specifically provided for in section 3760-121 2.5 of the Colorado Revised Statutes.
Thank you, Amy. Director Yan.
All right, thank you. In our board packet, it was $1,516,000, and I think when you add those together, it should be $1,516,090. I want to check.
Lane, if you're on, might you provide a little bit of clarification on that point?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's the 1,1.51690. That's a typo in the slide.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Any further questions or discussion? Director Brody. Director Brody.
If there are no further questions, I'll move approval of staff recommendation on item 18, litigation fund.
It's been moved by Director Brody to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 18, seconded by Director Yan. Is there any discussion on this item? I did just want to thank AG Weiser and all of the AG staff for your hard work. The pandemic has not slowed down the amount of work that you all are doing on interstate compact matters. It is much appreciated. And with that, we'll proceed to vote. If anyone needs to abstain or opposes the motion, please signify by raising your hand or telling me in the chat. Seeing none, the motion passes. We are at the end of our agenda for today. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Director Anderson has moved to adjourn, seconded by Director Yan. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. If you are in opposition or need to abstain, signify by raising your hand or letting me know. And seeing none, motion is approved. We are adjourned for the day. Thank you for hanging in there on the first virtual CWCB meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.